Now I'm in this paradox of I want to be this athlete that can do it, but I can't because I have this habit that I can't kick. And I went into a depression the first time in my life, and all it was because I had lost my identity. I had no idea who I was. It's just like sport. My story might not be as dark as someone else. It might be darker than somebody else, but it's not a competition of who had the darkest path. It's did we all get to the light?
Hello and welcome to episode 2 of the Ain't Dead Yet podcast. We're excited to be here today. We have our guest today is Keeghan Hurley. Got to know Keegan, I guess it's been about 4 years ago now, the first time, a little over 3 years.
Yep.
Got to know each other through some triathlon training and kind of followed his journey from there over the last few years through social media and kind of watching his story and how it was unfolding. And so really excited to have him here today. We think that we truly believe that he's going to bring so much value to so many people just through sharing his story. And that's the goal of this podcast, is to talk about, honestly, the things that a lot of people don't want to talk about. And it's bigger than us, right? The goal is to have people hear it that are struggling or going through a hard time and understand that they're not alone. So welcome to episode 2. I'm glad you're here, man.
Thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it. Like I said, we've known each other for a bit, and it's always been so cool to see what you've done and what you've accomplished, like between, triathlon and, the 100-miler and just like, all these different things that I've seen you do. It's been really cool to see you grow over these years as well. And especially since, watching episode 1, 2, seeing what you talked about there was also incredible. If anyone hasn't watched it, I would definitely encourage you to go take a look at it, because this is actually a really cool podcast that I do think is going to help many people. So it's definitely, an incredible opportunity, and I just can't thank you enough for having me on.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Absolutely. I'm so glad you're here. And to give everyone a quick backstory on my first memorable interaction with Keegan. When I first moved back to Austin, I'd found NVDM coaching. And Natasha, I was working directly with her, and I think she was on a trip or at a race, something like that. And she needed a coach to step in and run the track workout. And Keegan was that coach that day. And I'll never forget it, because I don't, you don't see this a lot in today's day and age. I don't think that there's a lot of humility in this world. There's a lot of entitlement, but there's not a lot of humility. And I'll never forget this day, though, because the entire time I trained with that team, and still to this day, if I were to go run with them, I would be the slowest guy by several minutes per mile. It's never been about speed for me. And the coolest part about that is Keegan treated me just like I was the guy finishing first, like gave me the same energy, the same effort, the same passion, the same love. And he didn't know me, right? We didn't know each other. And that type of character, that type of person is really special and unique in today's world. And I've told you this before, and I want to say it again and publicly, like that meant the world to me. Going through that transformation and that time of my life, I didn't feel a lot of value in a lot of places. So to have you treat me as I was valuable, or if I was valuable, meant the world to me. And I really appreciate that, man.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you for saying that. That's the thing that's beautiful. Like, and we'll go into this probably later, but like, you never know what someone's going through at the time. So you really have to be careful with what you say to somebody, right? And I'm sure we'll go over that. And that's something with like when I was going through cancer and all that kind of stuff. You just never know what someone's going through. You have no idea, right? And so my thing is, why ever treat someone ill or ill-mannered when you have no idea what their story is, their background, or anything like that, right? But more importantly, that's the beauty of sport too, is that we're all trying to do something, and we all experience the same amount of pain, right? So it's like, just because I'm going faster doesn't mean it doesn't hurt. And just because you're going slower than I am doesn't mean that you're not hurting as well, right? And that's the beauty, is that we all experience it. It's what do we do in that moment? Do we continue to push? Do you give up? You really find yourself within sport. And that's the beauty of really endurance sport specifically, is how far are you going to push your body? What can you accomplish with your talents, or your talents that you don't have? Like, can you work harder than a person, right? And that's kind of the beauty, like, with like the 100-miler or Ironmans or even half Ironmans, or, anything that's endurance-wise, is really you're trying to push yourself to the absolute limit. And at the end of the day, where you fall to your competitors doesn't really matter. It's what did you do with it, right? And I think that's the beauty of sport, and that's the beauty of that track session that day. Even though I'm, ripping around the track and you're ripping around the track in your own world too, right? It's beautiful because we're both trying to improve ourselves and accomplish very similar things. And that's why I've always had such a passion for coaching and helping people, and especially continuing to do endurance sports, because you can really find out a lot about a person and find out a lot about yourself through these kind of events.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I don't know if I've ever heard it described that well. I've tried to put it into words numerous times, and it's really, I think it's challenging to describe it to someone that isn't in it.
Yeah.
That's so tough to do, but the way that you just put that together explains it really well. And at the end of the day, and I've talked about this on different social media posts or in person to anybody who's starting endurance events. For most of us, like, your competitors don't matter. Like, I can't think of one race I've done since I've kind of gotten into this world, for me, that I've paid any attention to what anybody else did. I was happy for them.
Yeah.
That
Exactly.
they're successful. Like, that made me feel good. But it's a focus on improving yourself.
Yep.
And it's funny how endurance sports specifically, I think, translate to every other facet of life.
Oh, yeah.
How much can you endure?
Exactly.
Right. And that's in your personal relationships, maybe like with a spouse or your partner situation. Like, can you be patient? Right. Well,
Oh, yeah.
endurance sports teach a lot of patience.
Oh, do they ever?
You know what I mean? Because, like, you can't just, it's not just go, 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 go.
No.
You've got to listen, right? It teaches you how to listen.
Yep.
It teaches you how to respond appropriately. It does all of these different things that I think that people fall in love with over time, because you realize how much it actually impacts the rest of your life. And so, yeah, I think that we're going to definitely dive into some endurance stuff. But I do have another quick funny story before we get going. So it's for time reference, it's late February right now as we're recording this, and this episode will come out in March. So 3 weeks ago, almost.
Yep.
We were both at Rocky Raccoon.
Yep.
Different routes of getting there. Before, and correct me if I'm wrong here, before Rocky Raccoon was only your second ultra event officially, right?
Yeah, the first one I did was just kind of like as a favor, or not favor, just as kind of like a friend wanted to do it, so I just kind of hopped in it. So like that was my first like serious attempt at one. Yes. Yep.
Right. And you're not one to toot your own horn, so I'll do it for you.
Thank you.
What was your performance at that event?
The one before?
Yes.
Yeah, I won the Big Ben 50K, and
Okay.
so I was able to go 3:53 on that course. So
Yeah, and for reference for the listener and the viewer, it's really fast. Like, it's just fast. And the reason I say that is because at Rocky Raccoon, Keegan was running the 100K.
Yep.
And I was attempting the 100-miler. And the 100K distance, the first loop is, I believe, 2 miles longer. Like, they
Yeah.
added a small piece to it.
Yep, you just did a small 2-mile loop, and then you went on to the 20-mile.
Got it. So I should not have seen Keegan as much as I did, but I think everyone saw him, to put it straight. Like, I remember, when you think about ultra, when I think about ultra, you see a lot of people kind of trotting and, kind of just bouncing their way through the woods, and a lot of groaning and moaning and grunting. And you don't see many, like, I would say, cheetahs, right? in those types of events. It's just rare. And I remember, like, every time I saw him during this event, I'm like, dude, he's flying. I'm like, it doesn't even make sense. How's he moving that fast? And the conditions were, for all intents and purposes, trash.
Yeah, horrendous.
Right.
Oh, they were miserable.
They were bad, and in like a fun way, but they were bad for any type of speed.
Mm-hmm.
But he was flying, and I just remember being like, he's got to be running like 8-minute pace through these woods, like through these, through the mud, and 7-minute pace. And I'm just like, it's incredible to watch, especially for someone like you haven't really trained ultra specific.
Yeah, not at all. It was actually just a whim. I just kind of was like, hey, let's see how fast I can go, and just jumped into it. And so I'd say ignorance was definitely bliss for a little bit until it wasn't.
Yeah.
But no, I hadn't trained for it yet. No, I wasn't.
Yeah, it makes me selfishly wonder what is possible for you in that world.
Oh, it's coming. I'll tell you that. It's definitely coming. That's where like what I was really trying to do with these ultras was I wanted to try to get my nutrition dialed in for Ironman Texas.
Okay.
And so that's what I'm training for right now. And so, but I always have had a weak stomach. And so I was like, well, these ultras are really fun. Like I got bit by the bug. I'm like, you got gear, you can kind of eat, you can like, and then the people are awesome. Like it is such an amazing event that I was like, I got to check this out. So that's where like when I saw the 100K, I'm like, I'm just going to jump in. I know I can complete this. Well, obviously I didn't, but I was like, I think I can complete this and do it pretty quick. And so I've been practicing, but I think my mistake obviously was I didn't train for it, which is obvious, right? But I think I just wanted to continue to push my limits and see my boundaries. And I definitely found, hey, I can't run past 30 miles without training for it properly, right? But the adaptations that I got for what I'm specifically training for now, which is Ironman Texas, is going to pay off incredibly. But this fall or even just this summer, I'm definitely going to kind of pivot a little bit and definitely go towards, seeing how fast I can do 100-kilometer for sure. So it's coming.
Yeah, I can't wait to just be a witness to that. But before we get too deep into kind of life now and the endurance stuff, because we have so much to talk about, it's once you're in that community, there's so much of it's relatable, regardless of speed.
Oh, for sure.
Right, it's just relatable. So I'm pumped to get into that, but I wanna make sure that we tell your story.
Yep.
Right, and I want to make sure that it's told from your point of view, your perspective, and I think to do that appropriately, it makes sense to go back to the beginning.
Yep.
So, born and raised, right?
Yep.
Born in 96, is
96.
that right?
Yep.
1996?
Yep, January of 96. I was born in St. Paul, Minnesota, and then basically when I was 6 months, my parents wanted to get out of the cities, and so we moved up to this really small town in northern Minnesota, and it's called Dent, and so it's a town of 192 people, so like there's no one there. I mean, there's a post office, 2 bars, and a cafe, and probably a baseball diamond, a little bit more, but it's pretty small. And so it was awesome to grow up there. But yeah, so I was born and raised in Minnesota in 96. So
nice. And so both parents, and I believe I read this correctly, both of them former athletes at a high level.
Yep. Yeah. So both my parents ran at the University of Minnesota. Okay. And then my dad, well, at the time, it wasn't professional, because if you were a professional athlete, you couldn't compete at the Olympics. It was still an amateur, you had to be an amateur to compete, but he was actually good enough where he was getting money under the table, which a lot of athletes were doing at the time. So he was actually sponsored by Saucony. And so they were kind of, doing a deal there. My mom was actually the school record holder for the University of Minnesota for, I believe, 20 years.
Wow.
And so she did that in the 800-meter run. And so her time was 2:07.
Wow.
And she was also an All-American as well on a 4x8 relay team. So
yeah, that's unbelievable.
Yeah, definitely. The genetics were there for sure. Yeah. It was not tough to live up to it, but there was definitely not an unwritten expectation, but it was just kind of you just naturally gravitated towards athletics with that kind of, family for sure.
Now, for both of them, were there events mid to long range? So 800 meter, you said, for your mom?
Yep. And then my dad, he was a mile. So he ran the 1500 in 3:43, which is converted to a 4-minute mile essentially, because it's, they stop 100 meters short, but he ran 3:43. And then he was actually a steeplechaser, which is where you run the 3K and you have to jump over these barriers and jump into the water pit and all this kind of crazy stuff. But he was in 8:43 in that, which is, it's a very respectable time. It's you're on the cusp of really starting to push into some really cool territory for sure. So
awesome. And so you grew up understanding that probably from a young age, being. Maybe, did they talk about it a lot, or did you hear about it a lot from family and friends? Or
yeah, so for me, really, it was I wanted it. So I have 2 older siblings, and so So actually I was on skates when I was 2. So I was skating around and my dad gave me a stick and I was wanting to be a hockey player more than anything,
Uh-huh.
which everybody in Minnesota does, like that's what you're supposed to do. But I wanted to do whatever my brother did, right? And so my brother actually was a really good swimmer. And so I'm like, I'm gonna swim. I'm gonna go join him. So we actually started off in the pool, and so was my sister. So all three of us were swimming, and so we got really good at that to the point where actually my sister went on to swim at the University of North Dakota. So that's up in Grand Forks. So that is a Division I swim program. My brother ended up getting a full scholarship to Indiana University, and he had 4 Olympic trial qualifying. So
Wow.
he was, Olympic trials qualifier. And so the hard part though is it's the United States in swimming. You can't beat it. Like it's so deep that you have to be the best in the world to make the team, essentially,
Mm.
right? But yeah, so I was actually a swimmer. So, but growing up though, it was definitely like it wasn't expected that you were to be in sport, but it was definitely just like what you learn from it and what it teaches you. It was invaluable to what you were gonna, go through in life, right? And the doors and the opportunities that it opens up to you, especially from, a small town like that, like. I think it's awesome that the people that want to, live there their whole lives and do the whole small country thing, I think it's beautiful, but it just wasn't for me, And so I think what's cool is like sport opened that door for you to go explore the country, to go, really around the world is what it did for me,
Mm.
right? And so the thing though is I never lost sight of like that is still home for me and I still love to return and still try to give back. And so what I'm really hoping eventually is like, if I can make it and try to give back to the high school programs that gave me the opportunity, that's definitely what I want to do. But with my family though, the expectation though wasn't that you were going to make it or that there wasn't this like pressure of like you have to be as good as what we were. It was just we want to give you the opportunity to do it if you want to, but if you want to step out, you can step out at any time. And so I just kind of wanted to push it to absolutely as far as I could. And so actually what happened for me is I was split between swimming and running.
Mm.
And so my sophomore year, my dad came to me and was like, you need to pick because you can't continue to do both. And the hard part, especially as a young man at that point, if you keep swimming, you get bigger, like you start to gain muscle, which then hurts your running because you can't run with the 10 extra pounds. Run at the level that you need to, right? And so I was just like, well, what do I want to do? Like, I think I can go Division I swimming and I think I can go Division I, running. Like, what do I pick? And so I wanted to try to be in sport for a long time. So I wanted to go longevity.
Mm.
So swimmers are usually done at 23. Like it is a quick, fast, like you want to keep it. It's starting to change now, but at that time, like if you were 23, you were an old swimmer. And so I'm like, I'm going to go be a runner. Like I'm going to pick running. And so I actually transferred back to my home school, which was known for running. And then from there, I basically just kind of took off and was able to get a Division I scholarship from there.
Yeah, it's interesting when you think about. I wasn't around a lot of running or swimming growing up. I was around like football, baseball,
Yeah.
basketball, that sort of thing.
Yep,
But I had idols.
for sure.
So like, who were the people that you looked up to in swimming and running? Like, who was it? Was it Michael Phelps?
Yep,
Like,
for sure in swimming. Yeah,
Yeah.
Michael Phelps is just, he's the, gold standard for sure. What was actually cool though is, so this is actually where my wife and I really connected though, was through there's a legendary coach here at University of Texas called Eddie Reese. He's actually just retiring now. And so that was kind of like, hey, if we want to go swim, like, can we make it to Austin? Can we make it to Texas? And so like growing up was like, that was kind of where we wanted to go, but it wasn't, there was other really good swimmers from University of Texas too, but Michael Phelps was definitely, that was, the gold standard, like I said. In running, it was Steve Prefontaine, like, which is everybody's, right? Like it's the American grit, how hard can I, go and make you pay for it kind of thing, right? And so my dream was actually to run at the University of Oregon, but it's very expensive out of state and it's an incredibly difficult team to make. But I did have at the time, the coach did say I could walk on, but just knowing that it was $43,000 a year, I wasn't about to put my family through that, nor did I want to go into that kind of debt to run on that team. But it was definitely, Prefontaine and Michael Phelps were my idols.
Yeah, it's awesome. I love that question because I think that we all have different,
Yep.
idols at that age, and
For sure.
the way that we think about them at that age versus the way that we think about them maybe at the age we're at now. And for the people like Michael Phelps, I don't think that, for me especially, like being on the outside looking in it, like a Michael Phelps, he's always going to be so far ahead,
Oh yeah.
right? Like there's no I mean, I hate to say it, like I don't see anyone catching him.
No, and if you do, you can only tie him.
Yeah.
Because in swimming, you can only do 8 events. He
Yeah.
did 8 golds.
Yeah.
So, okay, the only way to beat him is if you win 8 golds in 2 Olympic cycles. So that would be 8 years that you're the most dominant person of, all time. So it'd be very difficult to top what he did. Like, so he's going to be the greatest of all time, if not forever, but it's pretty impossible to top him. It's kind of different. Like, like in basketball, we can argue, LeBron or Michael, right? Like there's enough argument. With swimming, it's a little bit more cutthroat where it's like, hey, you might have a faster time than him, but he did the perfect 8. You can't, there's no way to beat it. So it's almost impossible.
Yeah. I think of Michael Phelps on like a Tiger Woods, Michael Jordan, I think of him on that level, like just the absolute pinnacle.
Yep.
And even if the Olympic format were to change and you could do 9 events and someone were to do it, that'd be great. But to me, like you're never going to take Michael Phelps off that pedestal.
No, you can't.
It's so incredible. So those were the idols for swimming and running.
Yep.
I believe I saw you were a state champion cross country.
Yep.
Okay.
So, I was a state champ. So we won team multiple times. So actually my freshman year of high school, we were the team swimming state championships. We won by 1 point. That was actually a really special moment because my brother was a senior. I was a freshman. So we were able to win, a state title together, which was pretty incredible. And that was at the time too, where, things just changed. Minnesota, I don't know how many classes they have anymore. But at the time, we only had 2 classes. So it was, bigger schools, smaller schools. And so we were in the smaller school division. But one goal that my brother and I always had growing up is we're like, we want to be just as fast as the big school. Like, we might not be as deep as they are, but we're going to make the field of the small school be just as fast, if not faster, was our goal, right? But yeah, so freshman year, we won a team title. And then I had transferred from that school back to a town that was closer to me, which is known for its running, right? And so we actually won. We won 2 years. So we won my junior and senior year for a team, and then I won individually my senior year. I won cross country and track, which is you don't usually see that. It usually someone upsets you in one or the other. It's pretty hard to get both. There are people who have done it for sure, but it's pretty difficult. But the cool part actually for me was. My dad was a 2-time state champ in Minnesota, and so he did his junior senior year in cross country. And so at the time, I haven't kept up. Someone might have done it since then, but we were the first father-son duo to win state titles together.
That's cool.
So it was a pretty special moment my senior year when I finally got my first state title, but also to share that with my dad too, where it's like, hey, we finally now have this, father-son duo, which is pretty cool and pretty rare because, I would like to say, hey, I could get my child up there, but one, I have to count that they're good at running, that they want to do running, and then I'd have to move back to Minnesota. So those are 3 very hard, things to make happen. So I think that's why it's so difficult to see that kind of duo happen. So it was pretty special.
Yeah, I mean, it's incredible to think about because state championships are hard to win.
Yeah.
In anything, right? In any sport. And especially to be like a contributing member of that team.
Yep.
It's such a difficult thing to do at the high school level.
For sure.
We sit down on the couch on Sunday and judge guys losing in an AFC championship game.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yep.
Or the World Series. Because like in our minds, like that's a different level, but like playing high school athletics, like a state championship's a big deal.
Yeah. And I forgot to mention too, it was so cool about like the class that I kind of came through too. It's incredible what they've gone on to do. So the guy that I had to basically beat, he's now the American 1K record holder indoors.
Wow.
So he went on to, just fast. He had some range too. Another guy that was like in that class I was supposed to, he's Olympic trials marathon qualifier. My junior year, the guy who got me, he's now the 50-mile ultra world record holder. And then the other guy that was in the mix, he was also a U.S. Marathon Olympic Trials qualifier. So there was kind of like 5 of us that kind of came through. That was just insane. And that was just our class. That was class A, not to mention even class AA, which is it's a whole different thing. So like that time when we came up was a pretty tough time. So like if you could win, it's a
big deal.
It was big at that time. So it was pretty incredible. So to be able to top that, it was pretty special to do all that because there was so much pressure. Oh my gosh, the pressure I had on that. It was unbelievable. But you just learn, and that's the thing that we were talking about, like what you learn through sport, right? Like how do you handle that immense pressure of performing, right? Because you have one day, that's it. And if you don't do it, it's over, right? And so that's where like you got to figure out how to win and how to make it happen. And those are difficult things to learn, especially at 17, 18 years old. And also like what you have to sacrifice to do that too, right? So like that's the hardest part I think in high school athletics is it's so much harder than, not harder than, like, there's just different dynamics, but like you can get sick because some idiot, decided to pull an all-nighter and all of a sudden he gets the whole class sick and now you're sick right before your state championship, or you're dating your girlfriend and they want to keep you out late because it's homecoming or whatever it is, and all of a sudden now you're sick. Like there's so many outliers or so many different factors that come into winning that you really got to try to mitigate those. But how do you do that at 16? So it's like, how do you organize your life to make that happen? And sometimes it's just dumb luck. But for me, I tried to control as much as I could to make sure that stuff wouldn't happen. And that's just, it's difficult, especially that young.
Yeah. I think to go along with that too, like, so yesterday, I believe the world record was broken by that guy from Georgia in the indoor track.
Yep.
And in his post-race interview, he's like, well, I was sick. And so like I just figured I would give it all I had, like nothing to lose.
That's awesome.
And it's funny because I think the pressure of those situations to know you have, depending on the sport, maybe you have a couple minutes to perform, or maybe you have, an hour to perform. But in a sport like track and field, right, or swimming, most of those events, you can't, like if you mess up in the beginning, you're done.
Yep.
Because there's not enough time to make up ground. Like, it's not like a football game where you can come back, or a basketball game or a baseball game, right? It's such a different animal. So I couldn't imagine what that pressure's like. But I can imagine if you could learn to digest it properly, it helps in other parts of your life, right?
For sure.
You just know, like, what you can take.
Yep.
And I think that's got to be a benefit. So we got you through high school, and the name of your high school, to shout them out, it's Perham?
Perham. Yep. Perham High School. Yep.
Okay. Perham High School. That's awesome. I always think it's important to shout out your hometown, your high school, because we all came from somewhere.
Oh, for sure. And that was the cool part about like that town. I don't know if it's something in the water or what, but like we always said we were the school of champions. And so what was cool about that school is like there's an expectation to perform, right? Like you go to win, and if you don't, like it's okay, but next year you better come back and make it happen, right? But what was cool is actually one of the I'd say the pinnacle of the running community, or the running person from that school, is actually Gabe Grunwald. She actually died of cancer, I forget how many years ago. But she had won state titles. She went on to University of Minnesota. I believe I'm probably misquoting this, it's been a while, but I believe she took second, or she won an NCAA title. Then she went on to become one of the, I think she ran for Brooks. She went to be on one of the best Brooks runner for the 1500, almost made an Olympic team. And so it was so cool is that like, it doesn't matter male, female. I think what's cool about that school is like, you always try to push the boundary as far as possible, as far as you can, and then the next person's going to come up, right? So it's kind of cool right now, like, my mile and 2 mile record have stood for however long I've been graduate. I think it's coming up to my 10-year anniversary. But there's this kid coming up that I remember. He was really young, and he's probably going to break it here this year. And I'm so excited for him because like the opportunities, again, it just comes back to it. Like, what opportunities are going to open up to this young man, and does he take them? It's ultimately up to him. And so, but it's just cool to see that. And that's the fun part about records and about those kind of things, is they're meant to be broken.
100%.
And it's just amazing to see, like, I know where it took me, and it was incredible. I would never, regret anything that I've done or what I went and did. So I just can only imagine for this young man coming up. I want him to take them on. I want him to break them, because it's like, I know the doors that'll open for him, and I hope the best for him. But for Perham, definitely, it's a great place that I grew up in. I wouldn't be where I am today without that hometown and that school.
Yeah, for sure. And I love the mindset of records are meant to be broken. Yep. That's how sport progresses. Like I'm positive that kid knows what what the record is.
Oh yeah. Well,
I'm sure he knows.
It was so cool because there's this shout out to this restaurant Spanky's. It's kind of like a really cool fine dining place. Like if you want to take like your girl on a date, like you go there. It is a great place, great food. It was, I forget, probably 3 or 4 years ago now. Yeah, it had to have been about 2019, I think, or 2020, right before COVID. He was actually serving my table, and he's just like, "Hey, can we get a picture?" And I'm like, "Heck yeah!" And so I've been trying to. It's hard to get a hold, and you gotta be careful with NCAA rules. I wanted to buy him shoes and kind of help set him up. I haven't been able to make that happen, but it was just kind of a cool story to see where he recognized you, but you're like, "Dude, you're about to crush. I know you're on your way and you're going to do it." And so now it's kind of been fun for me to sit back and see it kind of unfold and see how it's, coming out and seeing what he can do now. So
Absolutely, man. So that's a heck of a high school career.
yeah.
It's really incredible. So so the next transition would be high school to college.
Yep.
Right. So I love hearing these stories because I think everyone's story from high school to college, it always has some crazy dynamics.
Oh, for sure.
And I've done some different reading and some investigating, if you will. And I think that yours has to be interesting based off of what I saw.
For lack of a better word, it was a shit show.
Okay.
Like it was quite an experience. It took me all over the country, which was the best part. And I got to meet a lot of incredible people along the way, right? I think the hard part at like 18, like I definitely was a kid that I wasn't exposed to drinking. I wasn't exposed to drugs. I wasn't exposed to any of that kind of stuff, right? So when you get to college, like it's a pretty big awakening for a kid that, I mean, I wouldn't say I was sheltered, but it's probably a good word for it, is that like you're sheltered and you go to it and all of a sudden you're like, holy crap, that's LSD I can't even pronounce it now. It shows you how much I know about drugs. But like, there's drugs on the table and you're just like, holy shit, like that's not what I'm used to. What do I do, right? You kind of freeze and you kind of get out of there because you're just like, that's not what I want to, partake in or be even, related with essentially, right? So a lot of that kind of stuff like happened at different universities, which is why like, not that I was running, but I just kind of, I'd either get pushed out or something would happen where then I'd be like, okay, well, I'm going to transfer, right? So that's where I kind of ended up at a lot of different schools, but I'm happy to go through, all of it. But the thing that was the blessing though is where I started, I also ended up. I went back and finished my degree.
That's cool.
So I did that, and it was important to me to do that because I'd invested so much time and energy into trying to get a degree that I was like, you know what, I got to finish this. And so I did go back. So I went to Southern Utah University first. I was recruited right out of it. Got a pretty dang good scholarship. It was hard to pass up. I was definitely recruited by a lot of different colleges. Because the selling point for me was that it's hard for Minnesota kids to run fast because usually there's a ton of snow and you don't get on the track until very late, which is a huge disadvantage to Minnesota running. Luckily this year there's no snow, so I expect very fast times. But my senior year, it didn't get above 0 in January, and we had snow, so like it was manly tough training. Like there's no other way to put it, right? And so my selling point was I got to a 9:07 2-mile and I got to a 4:13 mile. And I was like, hey, this is how good I am on crappy conditions. What do you think I can do in good conditions, right? And so Southern Utah was the one that kind of bought into it the most. And also at the time, Cam Levings, who's a very, very good marathoner from Canada, that was his college and he pushed it. So I went down there, and so I'd actually signed mistake number one. Again, I learned a ton real quick. I trusted some teammates, and they're like, hey, we got a house to sign the contract. Like, before you see it and move on down, it'll be great. And I'm like, sweet, yeah, like, this sounds good. So I trust you. So I signed the contract, put my deposit down. I'm like, I'm going to live in a house right away. I moved down there. I had my parents with me. I'm like, going to college. It's, 24 hours or 22-hour drive away. It's a long ways away. And I get there, the house is ransacked. I mean, just broken cupboards. There's knife holes everywhere. It smells like cat piss. It's just horrendous, right? And then like it's not clean at all. So I talked to the landlord. Experience number one, shitty landlords. Yeah. Hey, wake up, right? So I'm just like, this isn't ready. Like, I need to go out. And he's like, no, like this is it. You signed it. Like it's over. So I'm like, oh, how do I get out of it? Like, what do I do here, right? Yeah. So luckily, I had some friends that were Mormons or Latter-day Saints, and so they actually came in and rescued me, essentially. They're like, hey, here's how you get out of it. Why don't you come over to us? Like, we'll help you out. And they really kind of took me under at that time at 18, and it was just incredible. They just kind of took me over. They'd kind of have me over on Sundays for dinner, and it was amazing to be a part of that. But, during that time though, the coach had a really different coaching philosophy, and I had a really difficult time adjusting to that training. And so I came in really fast. We had an 8-mile progression, like time trial to see who could make the varsity. And I actually won it. And I closed in the second fastest time ever next to Cam Levings as a freshman, which is just insane. You don't see that. And we had a team time trial and we did an 8K. So it's about, roughly 5 miles. And I went 23:54 at altitude, which is insane.
Smoking.
It's like 440 per mile for 5 miles, essentially at 6,000 feet. And so I was doing great on my way, and all of a sudden my wheels fell off, and the coach, I could just tell he wasn't smart on certain things. I thought he was a lot smarter than what he was. And unfortunately, it just wasn't quite, it just wasn't fitting right. And so I'm like, I need to transfer out of here. I need to try to figure out, I want to get closer to home. I was homesick, and I'm like, I got to get out of here, right? So I was going to go back to the University of Minnesota, but last minute, I decided to go to Iowa State. And so I transferred into Iowa State and went there. And I loved that college. That college is such an amazing college. Like, it felt like home. I had a great time. The hard part, that coach, he was notorious for very different, being a dick, essentially. Like,
Yeah.
he was just very, very over the top. But I learned a lot from there as well, where I kind of learned how to be a man, essentially, is kind of how he taught me a little bit. But at the same token, there was a lot of baggage that came from it. There was a lot of abuse, for sure. Where I've talked to some of my buddies that had transferred out from there as well, where they're just like, do you miss it? And I'm like, yeah, kind of. And it's kind of like that, almost like you were the abused girlfriend where you miss that person, right? And I was actually joking about it the other night with another coach who knew him really well. But again, I respect the guy a lot because he wanted to take American kids and try to make them great instead of going and picking up foreigners and trying to do the easy way, in my opinion, to make a great college team. And so I respected the hell out of it. But the problem is he was trying to apply what worked in the 70s to what worked now, and you can't do that.
Right.
Back then you could scream at somebody and they wouldn't care. Whereas now, if you yell at somebody, good luck. We just don't receive it the right way, right? So it was really not a good situation. It was not healthy for me, and so I decided, like, I got to get out of here. Right? There was just abuse that was just I'd weigh in every Monday. I had to get underneath a certain weight. He would threaten you in the sense at that time with the NCAA, the athletes didn't have a lot of rights. So if you didn't do what he wanted to say, he wouldn't put you in a race. So he'd shut you down for the season. So you'd lose your eligibility. And then if you wanted to race outside, like go to the roads or try to go to the marathon, he would not sign your compliance. So you had to get a compliance waiver to be able to go race on the roads. But if you didn't, he could take your scholarship. So he basically owned you.
Yeah.
So there was nothing you could do. You had to do it his way, or you could keep your scholarship, but you had to quit the sport, essentially. He didn't care. So once I kind of knew that was the way that it was, I was like, I got to get out of here. But again, like, as bad as it sounds, like, I still respect what he was trying to accomplish. It was just the wrong era, essentially. But again, like, he had great athletes that went on to do incredible things, and I'm sure they figured out a way how to make that work. But for me, again, being from small town, nice Minnesota, that kind of structure did not work for me at all. So I went to another school that originally had recruited me, which was Montana State University out in Bozeman, Montana. So I transferred out there, which was awesome. I really enjoyed it. It was a great place. I always loved Montana. Growing up, we'd always go out there fly fishing. So it was a really special moment. But unfortunately, that's where all the drugs were, like I had referenced earlier, right?
Okay.
And that kind of makes sense in Montana, right? Montana is known for that. And so the hard part that I wanted to do, like, I went to my coach and I was like, hey, I'm not going to give you any names. I'm not going to be a rat. I don't want to do that. But I think our team needs to clean up because there's some guys that are really damn good that aren't on scholarship. And if these guys can't clean up their act, I want to try to help out other teams and make the team clean so we have a chance to probably win a national title if we can figure out our shit. So I said, just drug test a couple random people. And then the best part is that they would just get a slap on the wrist. They wouldn't get, nothing would, they just get a slap and they'd clean their shit up, right? What ended up happening, though, is he called me back in the office and said I wasn't a team player. And so all of a sudden I was like, whoa, okay, I'm screwed now. So then what happened is people figured out that I'd gone in and they thought I ratted on them, which I didn't. And all of a sudden retaliation started happening. And so I'm like, oh no, now I'm screwed. Like, this isn't good. This isn't, how do I correct this? What do I do? And so at the time, though, I was starting to wanting to do triathlon. So there was something called the college recruitment program. And so that's when I reached out, and this lady named Barb, she kind of ran it. And so she was like, hey, if you can run a, 1445K and hit these swim standards, we'll take you into this program. And basically this program is all paid. You get free equipment. You're a professional athlete through and through. They cover everything, and it's a year contract. And they're like, if you can hit that, we'll take you. So I'm like, I'm going to go do this. This is my out. I'm going to drop out of college. I'm going to qualify, and I'm going to go do this crazy thing called triathlon. So all of a sudden I did it, and I went and I hit the standards. And next thing I did, I pulled out of university, moved home. And next thing I knew, I was on this journey for triathlon.
Wow.
But yeah, so I mean, it wasn't what I wanted. I didn't get the college experience. But again, like, I learned a lot for myself. And I also, I probably should have just kept my mouth shut at Montana and just kind of went my own lane. But at the time, like, I was naive in the sense where I kind of wanted to help people, try to figure it out. And again, that's like, it's a double-edged sword, right? Like, you want to help people, but yet, how do you do it? And I just don't think I knew how to do that properly. And so then that's where I went into college recruitment program. We can talk about that too. But basically then when that contract was up, I was like, okay, I want to continue triathlon. This is my thing, but I don't have my degree now. So what I did is I moved back to Utah. I went back to Southern Utah, and I finished my degree out at Southern Utah, and then kind of everything kind of unfolded from there. But yeah, I mean, college though, I had a good time. I still ran really fast. I ran a 407 mile. I ran an 8:14 3K. I was going to try to steeplechase. I qualified for junior nationals. The coach didn't let me run the junior nationals. So like there was all these moments that, like, for me, and that's kind of been my athletic career, is always, I know I'm better than what I've given or what my result says, but I'm about to make it happen. But then something outside of my control happens where I can't show it.
Right.
But so I was still able to have a good career, still show a lot, but that's where like triathlon was really kind of my out and regave me my life, but also my athletic, journey essentially. And so it was good. I wouldn't change anything that I did in college, but also like, I wish I would have, maybe been able to experience it a little bit better, but it's all right. I learned what I did, and I've moved on, and I had an incredible life. And if what didn't happen, I wouldn't have never met my wife.
Yeah.
And so everything, I hate the phrase everything happens for a reason, because I feel like it's an excuse where people just give up and just let things happen to them. But I will say that, like, this did happen for a purpose. But the difference is that I kept pursuing and trying to do what I thought was right, and just keep pushing and pushing until I thought that I could accomplish something great, right? And so that's kind of what I'd say the difference is. Instead of everything happens for a reason, like, it does, but you still have to pursue something. You still have to push something. You can't just say, hey, let it happen, right? We have free will, we have free choice. You still have to pursue to do something that you believe in, and then opportunities will be presented to you along the way. And then it's up to you if you want to receive them or you take them or not, right? And so that's where, like, again, like I said, I wouldn't change anything, because I have the life that I have now, and I tell you what, it was worth every shitty thing I had to go through.
For sure, man. And help me understand. So I know, like, in college athletics, in like team sports where there's multiple people competing at like one time, there's egos within that for sure.
Oh, absolutely.
What are the egos like in track and field? Like, because all I've seen is what you see on TV or the Olympics, and like, I think you have to have a little bit of ego to be,
for sure,
to be at that level, especially
at Division I. Like it's cutthroat. It's any way to get an edge over the hard part is that you are a team, but you have to make it. So it is such a dog eats dog world. Like, it really is, because you have to get an advantage over your competitor who you're trying, or your teammate who's your competitor, but also you need to beat them, but you're going to work together to try to get better. But what's your advantage to beat them? Like, it's a really nasty world. It's tough. That's where, like, the culture of the team is so important, because if you can get past that you're individuals, it's incredible how far you can go as a team. But that was the hard part. In a lot of these cultures that, not necessarily in Utah, but the other two, like, the cultures were really negative. And it was like, how do I get an advantage over my teammate? And what ends up happening is you start looking out for yourself. And then all of a sudden you're just training on your own all the time, or you're doing stuff. So it gets really nasty for sure. But I mean, you just got to be ready for that. That's why, like, for me, I always tried to live with either a teammate that I knew that we didn't have that we were competitive, but we weren't, like, to the point of, like, like it gets so petty to the point where like you don't tell the person when you're going for your run because you don't want them to run with you because you know they might not get out for their run so they don't hit their mileage. It's dumb stuff like that happens that you're like, it'll happen to you and you're like, why didn't you text me you were running this morning? Oh, sorry, man. I just spaced on it. And you're just like, no, I know exactly what you're doing. Like, let's help each other out, right? Or like you'd have your long run, and again, you would go earlier than they would, or there's just all these games that happen that is just too unfortunate. So yeah, I mean that's kind of the dynamics of it, and you're trying to fight for a spot on the team, right? Because if you don't have a spot on the team, you could get your scholarship cut. So it's really like it's kind of like Drive to Survive on Netflix with Formula One. You're fighting for that car seat because there's only so many, right? Especially in cross country, there's only 7 guys.
Yeah.
So you have to be the best of 7, and there might be 30 guys on the team, and you got to beat them.
Yeah, and I think that different sports, right? Like, good example, football.
Mm-hmm.
At that point in time, this is before the transfer portal and all that.
Yep.
They were bringing in about 20 freshmen a year on full scholarship.
Yep.
Right. Just in that class. And then, you had 20 sophomores on full ride, 20 juniors on full ride, 20 seniors on full ride. And then that, I think they were allotted 80 to 85 or something like that. But there really wasn't the same risk of like losing your scholarship.
Yep.
Like it was rare. Like you really, honestly, it was to the point that you really didn't even hear it threatened that much because it was such like a difficult process to actually make that happen.
Yeah.
Whereas like track and field, I know wrestling, baseball, I mean, pretty much every other sport that didn't have like that same full ride capacity, if you will.
Yeah, for sure. Because especially at the smaller Division I schools too, they have less. So that was a question that you got to ask too. That's where like if I could go back, I'd actually help myself recruiting, because you got to know what their budget is, right? So I'll just give you an example. Iowa State had a $3 million budget for cross country. Tell me how you get a $3 million budget. Like that's insane, right? Like it's incredible. Obviously, it's the Big 12 that gave them that budget, but Southern Utah had like. It was like hundreds of thousands, like I mean, just barely anything, right? And so it's hard to make anything work. So you would have to ask, like, how many scholarships do you have? And they'd say 5 or 7 or whatever. And I think the maximum you could have is 12. So they tried to limit it, but some schools couldn't even get to 12, right? So what they came up with is partials, right? So you get a half, a quarter, books, living, food, like they'd break it down on that, right? So like for Southern Utah, I had everything but food and books, right? So like that's a hell of a scholarship for runners, right? Like it's basically full. And then what the idea was in Southern Utah is that you could get residency after a year. So what would happen is that when you'd switch over to being a Utahian or Ute or whatever that it is, and what would happen then is you'd get a full ride because you had the money, and then all of a sudden you'd save him money, save you money, and all of a sudden now you'd be set, right? That was the game plan too. But it's tough as track and field because you just don't have that volume of scholarships, right? And so that's the beauty of football, which I think, again, but that's a revenue sport. You should have 60 or however many scholarships that they had and even get it paid now. Like, you should have that because you're bringing in all the money. The only reason why cross country is around is because of football. Like, you got to support that,
but you got to be careful.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because
for sure.
I think you're right. Like, that's factual.
Yeah. So that's why, like, I didn't want to be like where it's you're not trying to be jealous of the football, right? Like that's what I'm trying to say. Is like,
for sure.
It's like you just had to deal within what you were given, right? Like if it's 7 scholarships. You got to fight to survive, right? Like that's just the reality of those sports.
Yeah, it's crazy to think about. So, college career, right? Still ultra competitive.
Yep.
Right. Still like trying to find a way. Right. So at every turn, I think that's what's really cool about your story too. Like at every turn you had an opportunity.
Yep.
To kind of throw in the towel. Right.
For sure.
You could have been like, look, I'm done with this. Like I'm not running anymore.
Yeah.
Don't really care. But you didn't. Like you tried to find the next avenue and the next avenue. And I see that trend popping up in your life a lot, right? Like you have these opportunities to be like, enough's enough. And I think what's really unique about you and empowering is how you're able to, like, at those turns, find a way, some way, to get to the next thing.
Yep.
And so the next thing is triathlon.
Yep.
Right? And it makes sense from a logic perspective, right?
Yep.
Swimming background.
2 to 3, yep.
Running background. I've only seen you swim one time, and it was at Barton Springs actually, and
Yeah.
it was before, I want to say before Cap Tex maybe.
Hmm.
But I always remembered it because like everyone's doing like, their swim practicing, and I see this dude literally come out of the water. Like I've never seen anything like it. And it's like, I remember I asked Natasha, I was like, what is that? Like what? She's like, oh, that's how you start. Like that's how you get your momentum and really get going. But I always remember that it was you.
Yep.
Right. And I'm like, geez, man, this is a fish. So you had both of those sports, like, so
Yep.
a good background in them. You had to pick up on the bike.
Yep, for sure.
Do you think that gave you a little more purpose, right? Because you had the skills in the swim and the run, but like, I'm not saying you were weak on the bike ever,
Yeah.
right? But like, was it ever something where it's like, I want to be great at the bike and I'm behind on it? Like I need to really hammer into that when you first started?
For sure. It wasn't the strength or the wattage or whatever you want to say. It wasn't that. I actually had really good wattage coming in. What we found out when I got into the program, because they wanted to see like your potential, right? So they did VO2 max testing right out of the gates. And so I actually had an 81 on the bike and the run, which is incredible. I mean, those are really good numbers. So they were looking at it and they're like, holy crap, like this is a huge opportunity. We have someone that's talented here and we should be able to work this, right? The hard part was it was all draft legal. Like, so to get to the Olympics in triathlon it's kind of like, again, Formula One, where you have to race all around the world to score points, and you got to move up through like 3 different cups, essentially. There's Continental, World Cup, and WTS. Once you get to WTS, that's when you can start score points and try to basically qualify for your federation. The federation is basically like the United States or Canada or whatever your country is. They have a federation, and then they kind of deem like, this is how you qualify for the Olympics, but you can only get an opportunity if you have enough points. So like right now, like let's say this year, like I wanted to give it a go. Like I couldn't even get into the race to qualify if I wanted to. So I would never make it. You would have to work your way up. So the hard part though is it's draft legal. So that's on a road bike and you're able to draft on the bike. It's a lot more technical. It's a lot more strategic. And so the hard part about like the Olympic distance is you have to be a very good swimmer to get into your pack, like of a bike, because it's basically like Tour de France riding is what you're doing. And you got to try to stay away and then get on the run and run as fast as you possibly can. So it wasn't the strength. It was more making sure that I didn't burn myself out in the swim to make the pack. But then I wasn't technical enough on the bike. So I'd actually have a lot higher power than anybody else, because I could do it. I could stay in the group, but I'd kill myself in the group and I'd have no run because I wasn't technically sound on the bike. So what happened to me actually was that I knew that to get better on the bike, I was going to have to take risks, and risks like that usually cause broken bones. And I knew at that point, being at 25, I'm like, I can't afford to break a collarbone and be out for 6 months, or I can't afford, because before I know it, I'll be 28 right now, but I'll be too old to really start to make a dent. So I'm like, again, I kind of rate out the risk factor. And so what I started to do, actually, I found a niche or a niche. And so what I found was actually Olympic non-draft. And so there's these races for professionals that the fields were when they were hard, but you could do the Olympic distance without having the bike skills. So I'm like, perfect. This is what I'm looking for. The risk is low and I have everything to do it. That's the route I'm going to go. And so that's kind of what I did for 3 years until I had like a really big breakthrough year of 2019. But until then, I always was specializing at that. So that's where I kind of moved away from ITU, because ITU is the International Triathlon Union. I believe that's what it is, but it's something like that. But they're the governing body of like how to race, to become an Olympian essentially. But so what I decided to do is to go away from that, because like I said, like the risk was too high. So that's what I found over here. And so that's why I started to go non-draft instead of being draft legal. So I kind of walked away from that. So that's the hard part too. Underneath triathlon is there's a bunch of different sports within triathlon too, with distances, how it kind of works and all those things. But yeah, it was fun when I was in the college recruitment program because I learned so much. I raced in China. I got a business visa to China, so I have a 10-year. It's still valid today. I don't necessarily want to make the trip right now, but I definitely have that. And so I was able to race in China a couple times underneath the college recruitment program. I lived in Australia for a while. I met some really good friends now that actually are in Australia. And it was incredible what I learned. We lived in Phoenix. We lived in California. Again, like I said, like when you have an opportunity and it opens a door, what it can do for you, this is what it did for me. It made it so that I could go all over the place. I even raced in Costa Rica. it was incredible and it was all paid for. So I got to just have this incredible lifestyle where, you know, everything was covered and you're just trying to get as fast as you possibly can. And it's an invaluable experience that I will never forget. And I can't thank that program enough for giving me that opportunity, because especially where I was at that point in my life, I needed something like that because my goal was always to be professional. I wanted to make a living at athletics, and I was going to try to find a way how to do it. And they kind of opened that door for me to a new sport, new avenue where I thought it would be more beneficial. So I took it.
Nice. So yeah, that sounds incredible to have that experience. Just it's rare.
Yeah, I mean,
Right,
yeah,
super rare.
You gotta be at right time, right person,
Yeah.
and make it happen. Really.
Yeah, and that's amazing. So that you mentioned 2019.
Yep.
Right. So what happens 2019, 2020?
Yeah. So, well, the CRP was actually 2017 is when I dropped out of college and went into it. So basically, from 2017 to 2019, I went back to Utah, and basically at that time, I'd talked to Dre. I'd met Dre already. That's my wife, and she came and moved with me, and we lived in Utah, and then we moved down to St. George. So I was going to school part time, so that would make it so that it was affordable because I had in-state, so it was like $2,000 a semester or something. So it actually took me 7 years to get my degree through all of this, but I got it.
Yeah.
But what I was doing is I was commuting from St. George to Cedar, which is about 45 minutes one way, but I made it the right way. So what I was doing is I was actually working basically, I mean, part-time, basically a full-time job that was remote. I was going to school and training full-time and racing all over the place and trying to make this dream happen, right? So in 2019, that was like my breakthrough, but I had gotten so much experience. So the program gave me that visa, like I said, to China. So my playbook actually started to be was I kept going to China to race. So I think I've raced in China 5 or 8 times. Like I've raced over there a lot. But the reason being is they'd cover your flight, they would cover your food, and they'd cover your hotel. It was cheaper for me to race in China than it is for me to race in Florida.
Yeah.
So I'm like, I'm going to China. So I raced over there all the time. It was incredible. But there was this one specifically called the Beijing International Triathlon. There's actually a YouTube video. If you type in 2019 Beijing International Triathlon, it'll pull up and you can actually see me race. It's 59 minutes or something. But it's a really deep race. So I went to it 3 times. And I believe the first or second time, it was like the Olympic final. You had the Alistair Brownlee, you had I forget the names. It's been so long, but it was both Brownlees and Henry Schoeman. I believe. Oh, why am I drawing a blank right now? Who's the Norwegian that's really good? Christian Blumenfeld. All those guys are there. I'm talking just like it is the best in the world that are there. And I'm just like, it's stacked field. I'm just like, holy crap. I got my socks rocked that day. But so finally in 2019, they switched it to a draft legal instead of non-draft. And I'm like, cool, this is interesting. I'm still going to show up. I'm going to see what I can do. So I showed up and I was able to actually take 4th, and it was still a very stacked field. Basically, I had missed the pack and they got away, but I was able to run back into 4th. But it was still the world's best, and I actually ran just as fast as Mary Amola, who's a world champ. I swam as fast and I ran as fast as him, but my bike group wasn't as fast because that's the dynamics of it, right? So coming off that race, I earned my first official paycheck. I think it was $6,000 or something. And I was just like, hey, like we're on our way. Like this is just the start, right? So the doors started opening. I started talking to Ventum. I was going to try to sign a deal with them. It fell through. We didn't do it. But like all of a sudden, like I started seeing like a path to making money and also making a business for myself in triathlon, right? And then unfortunately COVID hit. And so again, story of my life, just getting on a roll, about to make it, all of a sudden something happens, right? So racing got shut down. I was actually at a race and they canceled it. I was in Florida. I was at Sarasota, and it was the night before the race. That morning they go, nope, canceled, COVID. And so we had to get back on a plane, fly home, and that was it. So went through that time, but at that time, Dre and I, we were just like, what are we going to do here? What if we lose our job? What do we do right now? And so we actually decided to move back to Austin and live with my mother-in-law, go to her basement. She's got a room for us. And so we're like, we're going to live out COVID in this basement essentially so that we can try to stay safe. And if we lose our job, it's not game over for us, right? So we can continue to try to do things. So I actually graduated college in my wife's childhood room. It was like a Zoom, like whatever. And I finished it and I'm like, hell yeah, like here we go. I did it. But yeah, so during that time I was trying to figure out like where I'm going to race, where I'm going to make my comeback, all this kind of stuff. So what I decided to do is I was just like, what else can I have? What other opportunities can triathlon present to me? Right. So I found, there's actually colleges that give men's triathlon scholarships. And so they'll actually do it for master programs. They'll do it it's a club sport. It's not NCAA, but they'll still give you like it's a varsity sport. So I actually was like, hey, I've always wanted to get a master's of business, and I'll apply. Why not? Screw it. So I applied to Queen's University out in Charlotte, and I knew there's a really damn good coach. I mean, incredible. I have nothing negative to say about that man. Like incredible, right? Great program, great place, and I'm like, I'm gonna get back into it where I'll get a bunch of racing opportunities, race there, get my degree paid for because they had a scholarship, and figure out a new place. Like I think it'll be fun, right? So I did that, got into it, and then that's where September. Well, no, September is when I was cancer free, but it was like right when we were moving. We had the U-Haul ready to go, and that's when I realized that I had a swollen testicle, and that's when that whole thing hit me in my face too. So
that. For context,
yep.
On time, that would have been
2021.
Okay,
is when I got diagnosed and cured in the same year. So it would have been the summer of 2021.
So, and if you're comfortable talking about it,
yeah, for sure.
I think that most younger men, we have maybe a little bit of education on things to look for or feel for, or
yeah.
I remember vividly, like middle school, being like, you need to check yourself basically, and this is how you do it, and you need to be aware for any type of swelling or pain or anything like that. And I was a hypochondriac as a kid.
Yeah,
like anything we learned about in health class, I had it.
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Like I was one of those.
Yeah,
but I remember the conversations and like looking back on it now. And I went to a public school in Virginia, and I love my high school, like love them to death. Shout out William Byrd, like they're amazing. But like the education wasn't top tier, especially when it comes to health. You know what I mean? Like it just wasn't. And so for you, did you just wake up one day and you're like, something's off, like something's weird? What was that experience?
Yeah, for sure. So I mean, just to go to like the education part, like we were taught nothing,
Okay.
like absolutely nothing up north. And that's one thing that I wish that schools would do so much. Like instead of, without getting political, without talking about like, hey, like you can do this or do that. It's like, teach me about what I already have. And then from there, you can do whatever you want. I don't care. But like, at least give me that information, right? And so that's where like I feel like I didn't get the necessary education to know. Like I had no idea. Like I just thought, you get hit in the nuts, it hurts. Like that's just what it is, right? What I remember was so like that summer I was super sensitive, and it was really weird. We have a beagle, and so he would always come up and like hit me like right in my nuts, and I'd just be like, ouch. I'd be like on the ground in pain as if someone just full on kicked me. I mean, I was so sensitive. It was insane. I again wasn't taught. I had no idea. I just thought, wow, he must have really hit me in the right spot. Like that's crazy, right? So I had no idea. So we actually went up on. So what we usually do is in the summers when Texas gets too hot, we go back up to Minnesota, enjoy Minnesota summer, which is amazing, and then come back down. So we just did the trip up north and came back down, and we were still looking for a place at the time, so we're in my mother-in-law's basement. And so I actually went to shower, and I came out, and I was just, dicking around, and all of a sudden Dre's like, hey, stop. Like, I think something's wrong here. And I'm like, what do you mean? And then so all of a sudden she's like, I think your testicle is swollen. And I'm like, what? No way. Like, we're leaving here in 3 days. Like, we don't have time for this. Like, this is garbage. So I'm just like, okay, what do I got to figure this out. So I called my dad, and I'm just like, dude, I got a swollen testicle. Like, what do you think? And he's like, don't mess around. Like, go get it checked out. So we had a hard time like getting in to see a doctor, and finally at ARC we got in to see this lady, and they're like, "Are you okay to see a woman?" I'm like, "Sure, I don't freaking care. Like, let's go in." She was Texas woman through and through. I mean, she had her cowboy boots on. She was just like old school. It was great. Like I don't know her name, but this lady and this nurse, they basically saved my life. It was incredible. So I went in, and there's like, okay, like, yeah, this is interesting. Like, we're going to try to figure out, it's probably an infection, but just in case, we're going to get an echo for you. And so we told them about my situation, how we're trying to move to get to an MBA. I want to go forward with my life. Is there any way we can try to figure this out? So they called around everywhere to get me this. Is that what it's called? Like when you're pregnant and you put it's an echo, right? I think it's an echo machine.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. So they're like, we got to do an echo. So they found one at a child's hospital. So they send me to this children's hospital. And so I walk in and they do the echo. So I lay down and I got like, you know, like the little baby things that spin above your head.
Yeah.
So I'm sitting there like with this and they're like, you know, doing an echo sound on the swollen testicle, trying to figure it out, right?
Or an ultrasound.
Ultrasound.
Yeah, there it
Yeah.
is.
Sorry,
There it
not
is.
an
No,
echo.
you're good.
They're doing the ultrasound on it, and so they did that, right? So all of a sudden I'm like, okay, like they're probably just gonna give me pills and it's an infection and I'll be on my way. So all of a sudden I go home and that afternoon, like I take a nap, but I decide to leave my phone on ring, and all of a sudden it rings and I pick up and she just goes, "Hi, Keegan, this is," and again I went blank, right? So but like she is just like, this isn't good and you got to prepare yourself for this, and I was like, oh God, what? And she goes, you have a tumor, like it's for sure a tumor, and I recommend that you get this removed absolutely as soon as possible. She goes, you basically have two decisions. You need to set up your team here. And she goes, I'm almost certain this is cancer. She goes, but the problem is with testicular cancer, you can't biopsy. If you go to biopsy it, it'll spread. So the only option you have is to remove the testicle and then they'll find out what it is. So you don't have a choice. So she's like, when you do this, you're either going to be here in Texas or you're going to be in Charlotte. You have to make a decision, but you have to go as fast as you can because this spreads fast. And I go, all right, like I appreciate it. I'll figure out what I can do. So that's where Dre took over. And again, like you want to talk about three incredible women, whereas this nurse, this doctor, and my wife. Dre went to town. She called all over in Charlotte, just like, how do we get in? So there's this, I mean, Charlotte is really good medical system. They have Atrium and, what's the one that actually saved me? Not Newmark, that's a housing brand. The one that saved me, it started with a Novant Health. And so we're trying to get into Atrium because they have this massive cancer wing there, and they're like, the wait is like 2 months or something. And we're like, no, we need to get in now. Like, what are we going to do? So luckily, Dre found the urologist specialist of the Carolinas, like, because it's North and South, right? And so we called this lady, and this lady was just like, okay, we'll make this happen. Like, let's figure this out. She's like, when are you guys getting here? And we're like, well, we'll be there Sunday. She goes, okay, we'll have you in on Monday. So it was like a Friday that we're doing all this. And she goes, on Monday, we'll have you in to see the doctor and we'll try to make this happen. So Dre and I are like, okay, we kind of have an apartment ready to go, kind of not. We have the U-Haul ready. Let's go. Like, I'm not letting this stop my life. Like, I'm going to push forward with my life. I'm going to get this damn MBA. I committed to this. I'm going to go forward with this. So we get in the car. And also for me, like, I drive everywhere. So like when I went to school, I never flew. I drove to Montana back and forth. I do it in a day. Driving for me really clears my mind. Like, if I have a 12-hour drive, I'll do it. Like, I love it. So for me, I was able to really process, like, what's happening to me. Like, I mean, that's pretty hard at this point. You know you have a tumor. You don't know what it is. You don't know what stage it's at. You don't know if it's spread. You know you got to try to go see somebody, and you got to try to face this with all these unknowns, right?
Well,
so
real quick question.
Yep.
And I'm sorry to cut you
No,
off.
you're good.
So you found out over the phone.
Yes.
That there was
some type
potential.
of tumor. Yep.
I couldn't imagine. Like, I feel like, and maybe I'm wrong here, but I feel like a lot of times those conversations take place in person.
Yeah.
Where it's like, hey, come in. We need to like review your results
Help you
and
out.
kind of go through it. But what was it? I mean, what do you remember what it felt like, or did you blank when just getting like that information over a phone call, like sitting in your mother-in-law's basement?
Yeah.
I mean,
It was your life stops. I mean, that's why, like, I have this saying called pause. I even have the bracelet right here. It says pause. It's a term that for me really means a lot to me. And so it's there's negative things that happen that pause your life, and there's positive things that happen that pause your life. And to me, those are the things that make life worth living. That's the meaning behind pause for me. But at that moment, my life just stopped. Like, you don't know what to do. Like, how do you process that you have a tumor, right? And then all of a sudden now, when you do process it, you want to get rid of it. Like, you're looking at it, you're like, I want this off. Like, I know it's here. I can feel it. I know it. Like, I'm ready to I want this. You almost start to have a panic attack because you're like, I want this off. And so for me, the hard part too is like, I didn't know if it spread. So if I had a stomach ache, is it my stomach? I have a headache. Is it in my head? Like, oh, I coughed. Is it my lung? Like, there's so many unknowns that you have to control your mind. But at that very moment, everything just stops and doesn't matter. you just don't know, and you got to try to figure out how to control yourself. And because it's your body turning against you, and all you have is your thoughts. So
Yeah.
you can talk to people, you can do it, but at the end of the day, it's still your body. And if you die, you're the one gone.
Right.
Right. So you guys sit there and go, how do I process this and what do I do? Right. So for me, I just went into action plan mode, and that's what saved me. And I mean, we'll talk about this in a second, but I think that it helped in the moment, but it also hurt later because instead of like really thoroughly processing it, I just went into what do I do to take care of this? And that's why I kept pressing forward with my life. I didn't want to stay because now I know staying in Austin probably wouldn't have been a bad thing, but because I ended up coming back anyways. But for me, like I felt like at that time to move my life forward, I needed to go to Charlotte. I had to go there. But it's difficult. I mean, it's especially over the phone. Like I don't think it hits you as well, or it doesn't give you time to process because it's just like the phone call hung up and you're like, did that really just happen? Like, really?
Yeah. And who can you, like, it's not like we all have a contact in our phone that we know of has went through that or going through that we can instantly be like, well, I can call this person and talk to them about it.
Yeah.
Right. And maybe they can give me some peace of mind or a piece of advice or something to hold on to.
Yep.
Because it feels like in that moment, like you have nothing to grab onto really.
Yeah, nothing.
Other than like your faith, maybe.
Yeah.
Your faith and your family.
For sure. And even then you just go like, I never asked this though. I never asked why me. And I still don't even hinder the idea. I just don't. Cause it happened and it is what it is. Right. But at that time with the faith, you're just, it's tough because you're like, okay, you've given me something very difficult to come over. But here's where I the way that I positioned it in my mind is, well, afterwards I can think of it this way. At the time I thought I was going to die, but he also gave me one of the most survivable cancers you can have. Right. And so, if it's caught early, if it's not caught early, you're dead. But luckily, like we caught it early, but that's a whole nother story we'll get into here. But he put that in my life, to really absorb this or to do this, to change it for some way or reason, right? But at the time, I didn't know that. So for me, I still definitely turned to him to try to figure out, like, okay, what do I do here? Like, help me stay strong. Like, give me the strength to try to get through this. What can I do? And I mean, I really think I did gain a lot of strength because, again, for me, the hardest part through the whole thing was seeing my family go through it, not me. And we'll go into that for a second. But yeah, at that moment, like it was insane. Because also, that's the hardest conversation as a kid to tell your parents. Hey, Dad, I got cancer.
Yeah.
Like, and as a father, I can only imagine how hard that was. Because that's really, I mean, my person really is definitely my father when it comes to stuff like this. Like, I'll call my mom too. She's definitely incredible at this as well. Like, she came in clutch during this time. But for me, that was like my person that I was trying to, communicate to. And the hard part is that he was in the sense that it's still an infection. Like, it can't be, like, how do we know? It's biopsy. Like, it's trying to be positive, right? And there's nothing wrong with that, especially in that situation. Like, how are you supposed to react? But for me, I accepted it pretty damn fast. And I was like, we got to go. We got to go and we got to get this thing removed. And so I kicked into action.
Yeah. And maybe blessing in disguise too. Like the Carolinas are well known for their healthcare.
For sure.
You got Duke, you got Wake Forest, and if they're not working at Duke or Wake Forest, they're at a healthcare system close by.
For sure.
There's a lot of talent.
Oh, absolutely.
In that part of the country.
Mm-hmm.
So I know that where I'm from in Virginia, if you hear about whether it's cancer or some sort of illness that's dire, people go to the Carolinas.
Yep.
You know what I mean? They might go to University of Virginia here and there, but like people want to go to the Carolinas.
For sure.
So you could have done Texas, you could have done Carolina, but I can never understand the feeling because I haven't experienced it. But I can relate to you in the sense of like you just receive some news you have no clue what to do with.
Yep. And
the only thing you know to do is like I have to keep moving forward because if I slow down, it'll catch me, right? It'll do what it's trying to do.
Yep.
And so I understand when you say like you said I just need to get in the car. We just need to get in the car. We just need to get to Carolina. I'm still going to get my master's in business.
Yep.
Having those things, right? I think that helps a lot of people.
Sure.
having an option to go do something like that. So
Yep.
that's a Friday. You guys get in the vehicle.
Get in the vehicle and drive Saturday, Sunday.
What is it? Like 18, 19 hours?
Yeah. Yep. So we did most of the drive the first day. I think we ended up, where did we end up? Somewhere in Georgia. Like, because you can get pretty far,
Yeah.
and so we ended up somewhere in Georgia, and then it was we wanted to be in Charlotte like Saturday afternoon so that we were going to try to find a bed
Mm.
because you're going to go to an empty apartment and having a surgery. Like, it's amazing how much down there does. Like, if you cough,
Oh,
I mean, just so much happens that like you're out for the count. Like you can't sit, you can't walk, you can't like. It's an incredible surgery that like it's crazy. And so that's what Dre was trying to do. Dre, my mom actually flew down and helped her drive. So then I drove the Suburban and the U-Haul, and they took, at the time I had a RAV, and so they drove the RAV. And actually, no, it's false. My mother-in-law did it. My mom flew in later. So my mother-in-law actually came with, and so we went across the country, all three of us together, to get out there. That's when we met my mom out there on Sunday, and then they were trying to find, a bed, try to get everything set up. So what we decided to do was we were going to have a hotel room, through Tuesday, and then we are going to sign our lease, get into our room, and then try to get, a bed delivered at minimum, right? So luckily, Dre pulled it off. She had a bed that was going to get delivered Tuesday, and so we were going to have see the doctor Monday, and luckily we saw the doctor on Monday, and he just goes, "You never let a sun set on testicular cancer because it spreads so fast." And so he's like, "We will be in surgery tomorrow morning." And so that's where we met on Monday, and I had my surgery on Tuesday. And then Dre had found a bed, which was delivered. I forget the exact details, but basically in that time frame. So then I could move into my apartment, and then I was laid up in my apartment. And that's how Charlotte kind of started, was with that surgery.
Are there like, is it so dire in that moment to like do the surgery? Are there discussions around like having children, what that looks like?
Yep.
Do they give you those options? Like, is that all available in that moment, or is it just like, hey, we'll figure that out later?
No, that's a great question. Yeah, so we did do a sperm bank. Yep. So what they usually try to do is, usually they would have it where you'd do more time and you'd bank more so that you have an opportunity later to do whatever it is, IVF or whatever the kind of, to have kids so that you can have it. So they freeze it and it's, preserved for a long time, right? So we did do that to make sure that in case like afterwards complications happened, or if it comes back, that I still have the chance of having children. So we did do that. I forget the day that we did that, but we did do that. But usually what they would try to do is they'd still try to get the surgery done as fast as possible. But at the point, like, it was large, and also like since I was sensitive all summer, we had no idea what stage I was in. So he was just like, "You got one shot to get the bank done, and then we're going in and getting it out." So I think usually you might have more time to bank, but that was pretty fast to get to it.
Can I ask a vulnerable question around that too?
For sure.
Just for my own awareness and probably the viewers and listeners out there, maybe they're thinking this, maybe not, but I'm thinking about, like, I'm trying to put myself into that position mentally.
Yeah.
It's impossible to do, right? I didn't live it. But I'm trying to think, like, okay, if I have this surgery tomorrow and they're going to take one or two of my testicles.
Yep.
And they're telling me I need to bank sperm, and I need to do that right now. Like, I'm not, like, this might come off weird, I'm not sure I could perform in that moment.
Yeah.
Right? Especially thinking about what's happening down there and like, what's coming. Like, I mean, that has to be like a little bit of pressure there, right?
For sure.
Yeah.
I think the hard part for me was more like, does it spread more if I like actually donate?
Yeah.
Like for me, it was just like, you start to question everything, right? So like I was still able to, and we're still all good there. But like the hard part for me was more like, does that spread it?
Yeah.
Like does that, and like for me it was like, how can I stop this from spreading fast, right? So it's kind of like, also for me it was like, does the cancer get into that? Like, so like, there's all those questions that like, I was just like, and they were like, no, like it doesn't spread. It doesn't get into like the sperm. So it doesn't contaminate your kids. But also like in the back of my head still to this day, it's like, I don't want to use that because that was also like when the cancer was at its worst, like what did it do hormonally to me that might affect that sample, right? So part of me is like, I don't ever want to really touch that because that's always going to be in my head, right? So still to this day, it still kind of messes with you, right? But for sure, at that time, it was tough because it's just like, does it do all these things that later? So like if I'm, after the surgery, if I'm sterile and this is my one sample, well, did cancer affect that sample? Right. So like there is all these kind of like factors to it that add to it because, for me, having a family is really important. I definitely want to have children. And so this was even harder too for me, especially if I want to have children. And like, you can always adopt and stuff. But for me, like I'd want to have my own kid first,
Yeah.
but then obviously if it came to it, I would adopt. But for me, it's just like, am I going to lose that opportunity of life to have my own kid? Right. So all those factors play in. And it kind of makes everything, like I said earlier, like you never know what someone's going through, right? And so at this point, like we'd go to the grocery store and people would be like, how you doing today? And I'd just be like, I'm all right. And then they'd be like, all right. And then you'd move on. And so there's always that like video on Instagram that I'll see once in a while. And they're like, if a man says he's all right or just okay,
Yeah.
like you need to ask him. And I related to that so well because I'd say that to people, but I would just kind of laugh when people would cut off or honk at people or everything that we kind of do, our day-to-day lives. I would just sit there. I'm just like, it doesn't fucking matter. Like enjoy life, be a good person, do what's meaningful to you. I'm not saying YOLO it and do dumb things. I'm just saying like, just be a little nicer because you don't know what that person's going through. Right.
For sure.
And so that's where like, for me, like when we say on the track, like who am I to be a dick to you on the track because why? Because I'm running faster? Screw that. Like that's not life. That's not it. And if someone does treat you like that, get rid of them. They don't belong in your classroom. They don't belong in the realm of where you are because you're doing something much greater than what they could ever dream of. And so for me, that was like a huge moment in that time too, was just like how silly society can be at times too.
Yeah, man. So you do the sperm bank, you schedule the surgery for the next day. I'm assuming you go into the surgery. They've ultrasounded both testicles, so they like
they know it's just in one.
Okay, so like you're not getting put out wondering if you're gonna wake up with
no.
one or
Well,
not.
shouldn't unless they make an error,
right?
Which is a different case. But no, they knew it was the right one, so they're like, we're going in on the right, and that's where I'm just like, hey, can we make sure it's get the correct one? And they're like, no, don't worry, like we'll take care of that.
Yeah.
But they scheduled it for 5 a.m. And this was, mind you, this was still at the tail end of COVID, right? So the hard part too was like that morning I still had to pass a COVID test. So like I still had to go in. So like they swabbed me and they're like, if it's positive, like you're getting booted. And I'm like, seriously? Like, so that was another nerve that, I mean, I didn't really remember until now, but like you had to try to keep clean from, this super spreading, thing. And you had to try to not get it while moving across the country, while doing all these things. Right. So luckily, like I didn't have it. So they're like, okay, we're good to continue. But in the waiting room, usually you have people that can come with you, right? And so that morning, my mom came with me. Dre stayed back at the hotel. And so she couldn't come into the waiting room with me. So she had to wait out in the lobby. And there I am. I'm in there scared to death. I thought the surgery was going to kill me. I didn't think I was going to survive it. So I'm going in thinking I'm going to die, which is funny now because I'd never had surgery before. So this is also my first surgery ever. And they're taking a very important part to a man, right?
Right.
So I'm kind of like freaking out there trying to figure out what's going on. I'm in my gown waiting and these nurses were incredible. Like they kept coming on, making sure I was okay. But yeah, I was scared shitless. I mean, I really thought I wasn't going to make it out and I had no idea how much it had spread. Like I kind of let I couldn't control my mind anymore at that point. And so I thought it was everywhere. I'm like, this is going to be a battle and we're going to fight till the very end, but I don't know if I'm going to make it. Like I really thought I was dead at that point.
Man. So yeah. And because they can't biopsy it until they take it out, you have no idea, not just if it's spread, but like what the other preventative measures are.
Yeah. So in, and again, I'll have to fact check all this, but in testicular cancer, there's non-synoma and synoma, I believe. There's two different types that can happen. One's really aggressive, one's not as much aggressive. But the one that's aggressive, there's a category of all of them, and basically there's some that react really well to chemo and some that don't. Basically, if you have teratoma, that's a really nasty one that can and cannot sometimes respond well to chemotherapy. The ones that, and we'll get into that with the pathology, but basically I'd gotten ones that were really aggressive but reacted really well to chemotherapy. So the hard part though is like you don't know what category. So like it's kind of like triathlon, right? Where it's like I don't know what your background is, but once I kind of know and once I get your baselines, I can start to train you finally, right?
Right.
So same thing here. Like we don't know what I am, what stage I'm at, or even what cancer I have too. So like that's the hard part too. You have to get the pathology to dissect it and to figure out what it is. And the only way for them to do that is to completely remove it.
So what is that? What is that time frame, right? Like, is it like
That's the funny
you have
part.
surgery Tuesday morning?
Yep. It should be back really quick.
Okay.
So there's a couple things that I learned through this process too is Fridays suck in cancer world because the weekends the doctors go away, the stuff shuts down, right? Which they have to have a life, so I don't blame them, right? But if you don't get your news on Friday, you have to live with whatever you got till Monday. Or if you got your news Friday, you have to live with whatever you got till Monday. It sucks. So I learned to hate the weekends. But yeah, so the pathology was supposed to be really quick. It took 9 days.
Oh, wow.
It wasn't supposed to. But again, COVID backed up. What are you going to do? So I had to sit there just like, again, they removed it. Where is it? And now you're recovering from surgery. So you're going to have pains in places that you're not supposed to. Also, you're sleeping in a new place. Like, so I had pains everywhere. And I mean, again, I thought it was in my brain. Like I thought for sure it spread to my brain. And so I'm waiting for it. And if it's okay, if you don't have any questions, I'll go to what pathology got to me in 9 days.
Yeah, absolutely.
So basically 9 days later, I finally get a phone call. It's on a Friday. They tell me I'm in stage 3. And I go, holy shit, there's only 3 stages in testicular cancer. So there's 1, 2, and 3. And basically it depends on where you look. There's like stage 1A and then like there's late stages and everything in it. But if you're stage 3, what basically it means is it's spread everywhere. And you're kind of at Lance Armstrong status. Like good luck. Like you can do it. Like it's proof, but you got a very, very, very big uphill battle, right? So I'm like, holy crap, I'm stage 3. And I'm like, how? Like at that point, another shocker. Like I'm like, holy crap. So the problem is, like I just said, if you get news on Friday, you have to live with it. So I can't schedule a meeting. I can't do anything to try to get more details until the next week. So I had to live from Friday until I think the next time I could see the doctor. They were going to push me to Friday, but luckily we kept calling and they moved me back to like another Tuesday or Wednesday. I don't remember specifically, but I had to live like 4 days thinking that I'm stage 3, that I have this massive uphill battle. I just survived the surgery because I was scared. Obviously that's funny, but now I'm like, it's confirmed. Like I'm going to die. Like it's stage 3. The likelihood, it just went way down. Like you can still do it, but it's going to be a hell of a fight. Like, how do I get through this now? So that's where I'm at after pathology gets back to me.
So, yeah, I mean, that's something. I've had people in my family get cancer, and I can't imagine the mental battle.
Yeah.
Like that's just going on between you and you.
Yeah.
Right. And especially with circumstances like that.
Yeah.
Like one, to find out over a phone call, then to drive across the country, get there, do the surgery, not hear anything for 9 days, find out on a Friday it's stage 3, have to go all weekend, probably researching.
Oh, for sure.
And like,
Yep.
what are my chances? What are, all these different things.
Yeah.
Which is overwhelming in itself. And so you get back in on Tuesday or Wednesday the next week. Is there a change to that?
Yes.
Okay. So that.
Yep. So it changed.
Okay.
So then what ended up happening is, so we actually finally got in to see, not the doctor who did the surgery, but basically his nurse practitioner, or his assistant, or maybe it's another doctor. I don't remember the titles. I just remember speaking to people.
Yeah.
So she was really chill, and we're like, why are you so chill? Like, what's going on? Like, Dre's like, is he going to live? Like, she's freaking out. Like, we're trying to figure out. And she's like, yeah, he'll be fine. And we're like, but we're stage 3. And she's like, no, you're not. And we're like, what do you mean we're not stage 3? I got a call on Fridays from pathology saying I'm stage 3. And she's just like, oh no, like that was what your testicle was. I'm like, you got to give me some clarification here. I've never heard this before. What's going on? So finally she's like, no, like you're not stage 3. She's like, you're actually like stage 1 or 2. I don't know specifically what the staging is. You'll have to talk to your oncologist. She goes, but yeah, you're fine. Basically what they found, the reason why they couldn't figure it out, like basically my testicle was just completely taken over. Like it was done for. Like it was like talk about like zombie apocalypse, like it was taken over, right? But what they found is there's a sperm cord that goes up into your lymph nodes essentially. They found evidence of the cancer going into the tube, but they didn't find it going to like they didn't know how far up it went. So they're like, you're technically, so I didn't find this out until I met the oncologist later, but basically I was the latest stage 1 possible, but we didn't get to stage 2 because there was no confirmation it was in my lymph nodes. So I never went to go confirm if it was in my lymph nodes. So I'll never know if I was stage 2 or not. But basically, like I was the latest. So I caught it early. Essentially, is what it was. But unfortunately, COVID for whatever reason, they messed up my staging when they told me. So I was thinking I was going to die when really I had a really good chance of living. So it was tough where I had to face unnecessary things that I shouldn't have had to go through. But again, it really taught you a lot. You know, in my mind, like I faced the Reaper, right? Like you look at it and you're like, here we go. Like, what are we gonna do? And that's where like you're praying to God, like, hey, if you give me one more shot, like I'm gonna try to do X, Y, Z, or I'm gonna try to do things. And what's cool is it got turned, you know, for whatever reason, you know, if it was God, if it was whatever it was, I got the second chance where it wasn't stage 3. And so that's where, you know, you get some momentum now and you're like, okay, we can do this now. What are we going to accomplish? Still an uphill battle, but what do we want to do, right? So basically that the nurse had told us, she was like, you have two, like at your stage, you have 3 options. You basically can do nothing and see what happens. You can get a surgery or you can do chemotherapy. She goes, we recommend you talking to the specialist that does this surgery. Basically, what happens is like if you're stage 2, they need to go to your lymph nodes. It's kind of in your back. And so they can do it microscopically where they go in, and that's kind of what Nathan Adrian did. He's an Olympic swimmer that was really good. He went microscopic and got him removed, and he was okay. But this guy, he specialized in cutting you wide open. He wanted to actually feel your lymph nodes, and he's like, I can tell based off feel. So he wanted to do an 8-inch whack. Basically, he was going to cut me open from stern back down to my scar and just open me wide open. And so basically we went and saw this guy who specialized that, and he kind of gave me exactly what I just told you. And he's just like, but he's like, it would be a 6-week recovery. Anything that is cancerous, we'd cut out. And I do a good job cutting out whatever I could. And then you'd go on and you'd monitor yourself if it came back. But I'm very good at this. Like, this is definitely an option that you can do. He goes, also, if I go in there and you're not at stage 2, because I'll feel, and if I don't feel it, it's stage 1 and you're okay. So he's like, you have this option. It's up to you. So I'm like, okay. So finally I'm like, so I have this nothing, which I know isn't an option because in my head, I already know I'm playing mind games. There's this very invasive 8-inch whack, you know, feeling my lymph nodes cutting it out, or there's chemotherapy. So I'm like, what do I want to do here? So I thought ahead with my head. I'm like, what's my mental state going to be if I do the surgery in 2 years from now, which was where we're all right now? If I have a pain and I did the surgery, am I going to think that's the cancer's back? I don't always want to live looking over my shoulder. So I'm like, I got to nuke it. I just got to nuke my body with chemotherapy. It'll get rid of it and I can start fresh. And so that's where I went to go see the oncologist next. And I was like, I want to do chemotherapy. Like that's the route I got to do, especially with it being in such a gray area. I don't want to get cut open like that, especially because it's going to go through my abdomen and everything. I figured chemotherapy would do less to my body than what the surgery would do. Obviously, we found out later that that's not the case, but we thought that chemotherapy, like for me personally, I thought that was the best route to go next. And so that's when I tried to get in. But all of this was actually headaches too, though. It sounds smooth right now, but it was such an argument because what would happen is like they would schedule you for like a month later. And you'd be like, this is not acceptable. Like, what do you mean a month later? Like, especially at this point, they said evidence is spread, but we don't know where it is. I'm like, so I'm still fighting this idea of cancer could be anywhere. So I need to get in either to get a surgery or I need to get in to get my chemo done, right? So you're fighting with like scheduling all the time. So I don't know, again, I don't know if it was God or my age or what it was. I kept getting bumped faster and faster. So like instead of it being a month, all of a sudden it was like 5 days. And then all of a sudden it was 2 days later. And luckily, since I worked a remote job, training was done and school was just starting. I had all the freedom in the world. So if they're like, be here at 1 o'clock, I was going to be there at 1 o'clock. So that's one thing that I was very fortunate that a lot of people don't have is that flexibility because you got to show up to work and work's 9 to 5 or 8 to whatever. Luckily with my lifestyle, I was able to, if they called me, I was there. So I think that was also an advantage that I had. Not an advantage because that means I'm, have something over somebody, but it was something that I could do to make sure that I could get treatment, right? So luckily we kept calling, and again, this is all Dre doing the calling, pushing things up for me. And so again, we weren't going to be able to get chemotherapy for like 30 days or something, and all of a sudden they're like, we can get you in like ASAP. So luckily we kept getting pushed to the top of the list and got into it. And so chemotherapy is the route that we decided to go. And so we went to the oncologist, and basically she was just like, with your route, you only need to do one round, but it's a very intense round. So I had to get chemotherapy for basically it was 9 days total, but it was 7 days straight the first week. And what it was 6 hours a day. So I'm sitting there in a chemo chair from, I don't even remember. It'd be like 9 o'clock to 3 o'clock or something. I'd be like one of the first ones in there. So I'd get the best pick of the chair of what I wanted to. Beautiful view of Charlotte because there was a beautiful facility. It was like the 12th floor or something. So I'd get like the perfect chair to look at the city the whole time. But yeah, so basically it was like 6 hours, and they would do, I think the first week was all 3 drugs. I don't remember the name of all of them, but the one that's the nastiest is called cisplatin. That's the one that actually saves testicular survivors. It's a platinum-based chemotherapy, and that's the one that also wreaks havoc on the body. That's what makes you go bald. That's what it causes all the damages later in life too, which we can get into with like weight gain and all those kind of things. But this is the one that basically the guy who solved it, who saved Lance, he's the guy that I would say the founding father of this cure, essentially. He was the first one to put this in there. Then there's another one called blysamine. Blysamine goes after your lungs. So the hard part with that is it can ruin your lung capacity. And so I had to decide, do I want blysamine or do I not want blysamine? So I was like, okay, I had to make a decision right then and there. Like, do I want to risk not having lung capacity for sport, or do I want to risk having cancer in there? So I decided at that point, I'm like, nope, life is more important. I'm going to do the blysamine. So I did the blysamine. But so the first week, and then the third one, I don't remember. It was another tough one. And basically the first week, it was tough. Like they would give me so much IVs, like the IV to make sure that my kidneys wouldn't get hurt. And then they'd give me a steroid to make sure they would protect my kidneys. And then they give me the chemotherapy. So the hard part is like I would gain so much weight, liquid weight, and my face would just swell because it was just so much liquid that they were trying to protect my kidneys and everything from. And also during the treatment too, when they gave me the cisplatin, I believe it was cisplatin, but that's the one that can actually ruin your nerves in your hands, your fingers, all this stuff. So they'd actually put like freezer packs on my feet and my hands to stop the blood flow to reach it.
Oh, wow.
And so then that way it would protect your nerves so that you could still have feeling in your hands and your toes. So there was all this weird stuff that you had to do during this. So the first week was 5-6 hours a day. Then I had to come in the next Monday for 2 hours, and then the next Monday for 2 hours, and then I was done. It wasn't that smooth, unfortunately. So the first week was great. I went in so positive. I'm like, this is fun. Like this is kind of, so it was great. But then all of a sudden it started to get really old after a while. Like it was horrible. It was tiring. You would be so fatigued afterwards. And it was tough too, to see other people going through the same thing. Like, it's like, what do you have? Like, what do I have? How long have you been fighting it for? Like, you'd see people that have been in there for 2 years and you're just like, holy crap. Like, I just got to endure 9 days. I can only imagine 2 years. But also, like, you can't compare apples to apples in chemotherapy. And that's what I was trying to find out at first. I remember asking my oncologist, I'm like, on the scale of chemotherapy, how hard is this one? And she's like, this is hard. Like, you don't even go down that road. Like, this is a very hard one, and it's gonna be hard. And I'm like, okay. But the first week of the blysamine, that one for my lungs, I had a reaction to it. So the false thing that Hollywood has done, or the false impression that Hollywood has done for cancer, is you think you go bald, you think you throw up all the time, and you think you lose weight. Those are all incredibly false. Like, the baldness depends on what you get. I did go bald because of the cisplatin, but you're not supposed to throw up. If you throw up, something's wrong. You're not supposed to run a fever. You're not supposed to. That means you're having a reaction, and that's really bad. So on the first Monday they gave me the blysamine, I went home and I did not feel good. And all of a sudden I remember eating, and I had an appetite usually during chemo, which was nice. But I started to throw up. And so I'm like, oh no, this isn't good. So I tried to take the medication they gave me, like anti-nausea, but I couldn't keep the anti-nausea down. So all of a sudden I tried to take ibuprofen to try to get the fever down because I started a fever and I couldn't get it down because I couldn't stomach anything. So I was in probably the worst pain of my life. It was excruciating. I just remember being curled up in the bed. Just I had to be in a fetal position to try to handle this pain. It was horrendous. And we're trying to call. There's like a hotline to try to figure out like what do you do, where do you go, like all this kind of stuff. And they're like, hey, well if he hits, I don't remember the number. It was like 102 or something. You got to bring him in. And so we're waiting to try to hit 102. In the meantime, I'm in just excruciating pain. And the hardest part was I didn't know when it was going to end. So I just had to endure pain with no end date.
Yeah.
And I'm like, holy shit, like this is just like sport. Except for a sport, you know when it's going to end because you just got to hit a distance.
Or you can tap out.
Yeah, exactly. Couldn't tap out here.
Yeah.
Like you were living with it. So luckily, I hit the temperature we called, and this lady had a connection down to where I was. And so I got into an ER room. But again, this is during COVID. And now I'm going to an ER room with a compromised immune system because I already did a whole week of chemotherapy. And now I got to try to go to a hospital to try to get cured for whatever's going on. So I go in. So luckily they kind of put me in a corner to try to isolate me because they knew a chemo patient was coming in and they took care of me. But I was in an ER room for like 6 or 8 hours. Like I missed my class. I had to email my professor because at this time I'm in class now. I'm in school. And luckily it was remote. And I remember emailing my professor like, hey, sorry, can't make class today. I'm in an ER room from my chemotherapy. Like, and he's like, yeah, no worries. And I'm just like, am I going to get my participation points? And he goes, no. And I'm like, seriously? Yeah. I'm not going to get my participation points. He's like, well, you're not in class. I'm like, yeah, but I'm also in a freaking ER room. Like, it was ridiculous. But yeah, so that was a tough day, for sure. So like, it was definitely not smooth sailing. And so the next week, luckily, they pumped me full of anti-nausea medicine and I was able to handle it and be done with it. But fast forward or reverse back to before I started the treatment, what was cool is Dre had put together a video of people saying, like, we're here for you, like, had this incredible collaboration. And I mean, so many people in there to you know, it was amazing the community that I have and amazing the people that came to support. It was unreal. I mean, that really gave me so much strength to go through. But speaking of how, like, sport teaches you things, right? So Nathan Adrian, he'd actually sent a video because he'd gone through testicular cancer and then still went on. And I think he didn't make his comeback to win the Olympic gold after it, but he had won. I mean, he's the fastest sprinter. I mean, just incredible swimmer, right? And so he sent a video going, you're a triathlete. Like the hardest training week you've ever done is just going to be the same thing for what you're doing here. Like you got this. And so it was kind of cool to hear that from someone who made it so high in it where it's like, you're right. Like, I can handle this. This is just going to be a really freaking hard training week. And peak week. Got to go right through it and just, you know, take it on. And so was able to do that. And luckily on the last day, I got to ring the cancer-free bell, which was incredible. It was an amazing moment. I definitely have footage of that. That was pretty special. At that time, my hair was just starting to fall out too. So it was one of those weird things where like I'm cured, but all the stuff that's going to happen to me is still after I ring the bell, really. So, but
yeah, and I think for me and from my own selfish interest and maybe for the viewer, to me the most interesting part of your story is what you've done after you ring the bell, right? And to what you're just saying, like it's not the end, right? Sure. There's this, and I think Hollywood does that too, where it's like you ring the bell and life is back to normal.
Yep.
You know, everything's normal. Your hair's going to grow right back immediately. You're going to shed the chemo weight.
Yeah. And they're like 2 years later, you have this big happy family in the car and everything, and everything's all happy dory. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And I think that, that's a lot of people's view on it, right? Unless they've had someone close to them go through it. And I think I remember when you talked about Drea putting the video together, I remember that.
Yep.
And I remember Natasha actually like asking,
you
know, and I thought that was so cool from a community perspective.
Oh, for sure.
And I remember at that time, I don't know if there's still affiliation there or not, but I remember BPN
for sure
also kind of showing up.
Oh, absolutely.
You know, in that way.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's the incredible part about like the whole journey too is like, you know, with Nick and the whole BPN crew, because we were so close at the time and still are. I just bumped into Nick actually the Austin Marathon weekend, so he's doing it's great. It's crazy to have those kind of connections, those kind of people support you. And that was the part that I think for me, like going through everything that I did, I always thought I was kind of the lone wolf or the solo guy trying to get through it. And all of a sudden, I didn't realize how many people actually cared for me and how much I actually influenced people, or even, so like example would be like, so I thought when I was going to transfer to Minnesota and I didn't, I went to Iowa State. There's a friend of mine that he beat me my junior year for it. And his name's Charlie. He's the 50-mile world record holder now. Great guy. And I didn't know that he actually still thought like a high regard for me. And so actually when I went through that, like he kind of told me, and then afterwards I saw him and he's just like, dude, I was gutted during that. I couldn't believe that you were going through that. I'm so happy that you're back. Like, I had no idea that these people thought as highly of me as that. I didn't know that. So for me, it was like a really good wake up call to see that, but also it gave me the strength too, where it's like, I'm not done yet. I ain't dead yet.
Yeah.
Right. Like I gotta keep pushing forward. There's still more to do out of this chair. I didn't know what it was going to be at the time, but I knew that it's like, there's something here for me to continue. I also like to think too, like when you faced like the Reaper, how I like to say it too, is like, for me, it was like when I saw it, I felt like there's an episode in Peaky Blinders where they're about to get hung and they don't. And all of a sudden from there, he goes, every moment from here now is like a bonus. Like we've already died at when we were hung, but we didn't. And now we're living. And so for me, like, I know the episode's probably a lot different, a different interpretation, but that's kind of how I took it, where it's like, I faced death. I did it. To me, I should have been dead, and I'm not. And so I'm still here, and I have a purpose now, and I gotta continue to do something. And that's where I made that promise to myself when I was in the chemo chair. It was one of my last days. I remember looking down at the street, and I was like, when I get out of this chair, I'm gonna live a full and meaningful life, and I gotta do it where I inspire others to do incredible things and try to influence people to do things that they normally wouldn't do. And so I'm like, this is bigger than just myself. This is bigger than anything, and I want to try to help it, especially like for me, like community was never really a big part of my life because I just, again, like I felt like I was the lone dog, right? And so finally, like now, like being here with NVDM, this community, or even now with like Dash Hydrate or even BPN, like there was this family to it where these people had my back, and I never had that. I always felt like someone was out to screw me or something to happen. And all of a sudden with that video, that really was a huge pivot in my life, where it's like, there is a really cool community here that's been created, a very special group of people. Kind of like how we talked earlier, like there's the Division I attitude where, hey, and that's probably why I had that, I'd call it paranoia, because I've been screwed so many times that it was hard to open myself up to a community. And now, like, I wouldn't change it for anything. Like, it's incredible, the people that are in this community, and I wouldn't change it for anything.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think what's interesting is in those moments of life that are dire, these like rivals between brands and companies and coaches and supplements and athletes and all the different things that are involved with this community, like those rivalries, like I think it was cool from the outside to see that not really matter.
Yep.
Like it didn't matter.
Not at all.
It was like, we want to support Keegan.
Yep.
We want Keegan to beat this. And I think that was cool and unique because, in today's world, it's similar to like when you're talking about with track, it's a dog eat dog world. Everybody's bashing everybody.
Yep.
Whether they like to admit it or not, they're doing it some way
For
or
sure.
another. And so to see everyone get behind you was really cool and really special. And that had to give you some jet fuel, you know what I mean? Of like, okay, like people are also watching now. Right?
Sure.
People are paying attention, and I think in those moments, those are some of the greatest gifts on earth, because it's like, it's for me, when I look at it or think about it, it's like God saying, hey, I'm going to give you this extra pressure because I know you can handle it.
Yep.
But you're going to help so many people by working through it.
Exactly.
And I feel like in your story and from what you're doing now and what I see, like that's what you're doing. And it's so empowering. So, but I don't want to rob the end of it. So
no, you're good.
You ring the bell.
Yep.
Okay. You're back in school.
Yep.
Right. You get your participation
Yeah.
For hopefully, you know what I mean? Hopefully,
I ended up dropping that class, but
I don't blame you.
Yeah.
I would have had some choice words for that guy.
For sure.
So, but you get through that, and then this is all in Carolina, and then now you're back in Austin.
Yep.
Right. So did you finish your master's or?
Yep. So that's great. So when I was in Charlotte, like, so there's still like a national championships.
Okay.
So what I actually did is like when I got done with it, I was like, I got to get ready for my team here in Charlotte and try to qualify for the national championships and try to be a member to score for them. Right. So actually what I did is I was just like, what can I do? I can't do anything intense. So I actually decided to do a 700-mile bike week. And so
I remember this. Yeah.
So that was the first thing that I actually kind of to come back. I'm like, you know what? I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna do a century a day. Like, screw it. I got the time. I'm gonna do this because, you know, at the time I still, like, I was managing, you know, coaching. I had my school was pretty easy at the time because I had dropped that one class.
Yeah.
So I'm like, I got so much more time back. I'm gonna give something a go. And so I did it. I did a 700-mile week, and I'm like, oh my gosh, that was incredible. Like, it was I don't know, again, something that I'd never done. It was probably the spark of my love of endurance, true endurance. Because before that, I'd only ever done Olympic distance, right? I hadn't touched a half Ironman. I hadn't touched an ultra. I really was still that shorter distance guy that when it hurt, you just push faster and it's done, you know.
Sooner.
So it's not like endurance, right? So it was like my first taste of it, and I loved it, right? And it was also incredible the reaction I got from it. It was almost a better reaction than my 2019 race. And I'm like, that's weird. Yeah. Like, okay, cool. Like, that's like, so, you know, like, all right, let's see what we can do, right? So I did qualify for the national team. I did go. I was a member. I did all right at the time. Like, it wasn't my best performance, but also, like, I was still bald at the time. Actually, the day before the race, I actually pulled out a stitch out of my wound. So where they cut me, I actually was pulling stitches out of myself. And so the night before, actually, I had to pull out about an inch, and I had to cut it with the scissors, and I had this huge stitch. And I'm like, well, here we go. We're gonna see what we can do tomorrow. And so I raced. I forget what place I placed. I think it was top 40 or something, and for us. And so we ended up winning the national championship. And so I was a part of the national championship team. And unfortunately, Charlotte just wasn't home, like, especially for Dre and I both. And also, it started to become the city that saved me, but also it's where I fought cancer.
Yeah.
Like, and so it was kind of a double-edged sword where it just wasn't home. And so we're like, we got to go back to Austin. Like, we got to do that. So actually what we did do, though, is we moved back to Minnesota because it was the summer. I got to live in Minnesota for the summer. And then that fall, we went back down to my mother-in-law's to wait until we found an apartment, essentially. And then we wanted to move back into Austin.
Before we get back to Austin, you just got me fired up because I remember that century, like, a day deal.
Yep.
And to put that in context for the viewers or the listeners, we're talking, did you do them outside on a trainer?
I did a combination, but most of it was on a trainer so I could stop and eat.
Right.
Yep.
So 700 miles, though.
It took me 35 hours.
35 hours of work.
Yep.
Right. So, and on top of that, you're on a bike seat.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Like, that can't.
No, it was weird.
It had to feel weird.
For sure.
It had to be uncomfortable.
Yep. And
that was how many days post chemo?
So it's a great question. So it was pretty quick after chemo. It was definitely like I was pushing it. It was, I know it was like, because 6 weeks after surgery, you could finally start to like move and walk again. So I want to say it was within 8 to 10 weeks after my surgery. Like I came back. I wanted to get back on that bike right away, like get back in the saddle again, and that's what I did. After chemo, I don't remember the specifics of it. We could look it up, but it was pretty quick. I got back into it. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and that gets me fired up, right? Because it's like I'm sure you were still battling mentally with a ton of stuff.
Oh, for sure.
And fear and all these different things, but you're just like, it goes back to that deal you made sitting in that chair.
Yep.
And you're like, okay, well, all that might be happening. But like, that's not going to stop me today.
Not at all.
And that's what gets me fired up. And that's to me what this podcast is about.
Yep.
Because there's going to be those times. It's going to happen again in our lives in a different way. It's going to show up in a different way. And you're going to have something that is, you know, arguably like it could really mess your life up that you have no control over in that moment. But the only thing you have control over is what you do right now.
Yep.
And so, you know, that's the message that I try to share too, is like, you have to control what you can control right now.
Absolutely.
Because sitting there and like wallowing in it, it just gets darker.
Yeah, it does.
Like the light doesn't get brighter when you're doing that. And so, so you did the century a day for 7 days. You competed with your team. You and Dre are like, all right, we miss Austin.
Yep, for sure.
We've got family and community there. I'm sure you felt the draw after the video and all those things too.
Oh, for sure.
Wanting to be near that. So you hit your summer spot, get back down to Austin.
Yep. And so I was still going to school at the time because I was going to I really want to try to finish that MBA.
Yes.
And so what I was going to do is I worked out a deal with my coach that I could train here, but then fly in and race at nationals, or like basically like I worked out a deal that I could do that. Right. And so we were doing it. And so like my MBA program was really fun. Like there was classes that I really enjoyed, but it was really easy. I mean, and I don't mean that in like a bragging way, but it was almost like it almost felt like a waste of time. Like I wasn't learning what I thought a master's would entail, honestly. There was definitely some challenging things, but it was a lot of group work. I was shocked about the amount of group work. And so what I hated about it is that like we had this project where we had to invent a company, and it was for like this accounting. And so I knew what the professor was trying to teach us, and I'm just like, why don't we do something similar to NVDM? Low overhead, not a lot. Like it's a service company. Like it would be really easy to do accounting. Like I know it's harder, but like for an accounting class, you could make it pretty easy, right? Like do a coaching service. It's really simple, like from an accounting standpoint. No, we had to do a dog food company that delivered by robots.
Oh wow!
And that my group was committed to this, and I'm like, seriously? And they're like, yeah. I'm like, guys, this is going to be a lot harder, and we're going to get a bad grade because it's so complex. So I remember talking to my professor, and she's just like, no, you guys are way overthinking this. And also I told my group, I'm like, guys, if you try to deliver a robot to my hometown, they're going to shoot it. Like it's not getting to the door. And also they're not going to feed the dog CBD dog food. I'm sorry. That's not where I grew up from. So basically, long story short on that, there was a lot of the stuff that I was running into that I'm just like, I'm not going to pay the money that I am to get this education. So basically finally in the fall, I'm just like, hey coach, I'm really sorry. Like, I got to pull out. I'm going to stop my MBA. Like I got opportunity in coaching to really make an impact on people. I'm going to go this way. So basically after like a year and a half or a year of trying to do my MBA, I pulled out of it. And then I started to really focus on coaching, really focus on training. And that's when I did my last professional race, I believe, at Indian Wells that winter. So I was just like, I'm going to go back to coaching and training and just really focus on this and dedicate my time and get back into the Austin community instead of being pulled back to Charlotte. And again, nothing but anything positive to talk about that program. But just like the MBA was not, again, it wasn't the experience that I thought it was going to be. And so I just decided to leave it. Instead of spending money to waste time, I was like, I'm going to go make more money and make more of an impact now than staying in a program. So that's why I ended up pulling out of it.
Got it. So you get back, and for the viewer and listener, you and Drea both have been a part of NVDM coaching
since it started.
Since the beginning.
Yep.
And both of you still are coaching within that team?
Correct. Yep.
And so I think for me that's always been impressive because in any sport or any world of business, like you see a lot of turnover in different places.
For sure.
So it's cool that you guys have been there since inception.
Oh, it's been incredible.
And we could probably, and this has happened back-to-back podcasts, but like we could probably spend like a separate hour and a half
whole episode on what Natasha has done and created. It's just, I mean, the best way to do it is probably just like what she's created in the community is just it's a gem. It's a diamond in the rough. You just do not see that kind of culture, that kind of program start. And what she's done is just, it's honestly mind-blowing how well she's done and what she's created. And it's to the point where I think it's just going to continue to grow.
Yeah.
And it's incredible. And so that's where like I feel very fortunate to be a part of that coaching program, but also to like have the opportunity to help people. I mean, that's really what's so rewarding to me as a coach now is that I get to do everything that I hated that the other coaches I did before, right? I want to try and I'm human, I'm going to mess up, but I want to try to give my coach or my clients or my, athletes the best experience that they can possibly have, right? And so that's an incredible outlet that, Natasha has granted me. And then also she changed my life too. I mean, she gave me a community, and that's you can't change that, right? And so
Mhm.
it's been a gift for both of us to be a part of that, and it's yeah, I mean, it's changed our life. I mean, there's no doubt about it.
So with all that being said, and you have your purpose in coaching. I'm
Yep.
sure you have purpose in marriage. And
Yeah, for sure.
what what gets Keegan out of bed today?
Yeah, it's a great question. Um, I mean, so to reverse a little bit on that, I mean, so I did that professional race at Indian Wells, right?
Yeah.
Did pretty well. Lost my pro card. Basically, for the listeners to know, like in triathlon, you can earn your professional license, which then gets you into the professional field, which then you can earn money. If you're an amateur and you race well and you would have won the race, you don't get the money because you don't have your card, but you would earn your card. I lost my card because you have 3 years to prove that you're at a certain caliber. Obviously, 2 years COVID, 1 year cancer, didn't have the opportunity to re-earn that. And I didn't feel like arguing for my pro card or like trying to get a special whatever to try to keep it. I
Hmm.
didn't think it was worth it. I just wanted to go back to being an amateur. So I actually went all in for trying to race Galveston 70.3. So it'd be my second one. I went all in to try to break 4 hours. Like I was so committed. It was incredible. And it was so hot, I missed it. And I went slower than what I did in Indian Wells, I think, or I went like 4:14 or something. And it was a bad day. It was a failure. And that hit me hard.
Mm.
And for me, I got on the scale after the race thinking, hey, like I'll be back to 175 or maybe 180. And I was 200 pounds. And
Mm.
so for you to know, like when I raced professionally, I would hover between 160 to 170, but I could lose weight like it was nothing, right? And so for me to go all out for a race, miss it, and then realize I'm 200 pounds, it was a really dark moment for me to just be like, is this even possible for me to get back to a professional level? Like
Mm.
the watts per kilo, which is really important for racing, can I get to it? Like now my power numbers have to be so much higher to do the same thing that I'd done before at 170. So that summer, it was really dark. I was like, okay, I'm gonna go back to my bread and butter. I'm gonna go to running. I know I'm just gonna break 16 minutes in a 5K. That'll be a breeze. I've done 5 miles at 4:40. That'll be nothing. Couldn't break it. I went to a race, ran 16:07. I ran time trials, 16:10. I could not break 16 minutes. And just like for me personally, I did that when I mean, probably ninth grade I did that, or eighth grade I did that. Like it should have been so easy for me, and I couldn't touch it, and I put everything into it. So all of a sudden, I started having an identity crisis. So now I missed my goal that I went all in. I am trying to do my bread and butter that I know has always been there for me, and all of a sudden now I'm in this really dark place of like, who the hell am I?
Mm.
Like, holy shit! And then all of a sudden now weight started playing a huge factor in my mind, like okay, how do I lose weight? Like, what do I'm 200 pounds. So all of a sudden we started doing research. And so that's where there's been a lot of studies done in Norway and all these other things where the chemotherapy that you did later in life, there's a lot of problems that can happen with testicular cancer survivors, whether it's diabetes, whether it's overweight, if it's metabolic issues, it can wreak havoc on your system. And so all of a sudden I'm like, oh shit, like I can't lose weight. And I'm trying. I'm training 17 to 20 hours a week, eating pretty damn clean. And I'm like, what am I going to do here? And so all of a sudden it became really difficult. And so one thing that I kind of struggled with too was that like for me at the end of the day, I would crack a beer, right? So all of a sudden I started to get into a habit of drinking. So one turned into two, two turned into three, three turned into four. And all of a sudden I kept myself there, but all of a sudden now it became a habit to drink 4 beers a day,
Mm.
right? And so all of a sudden now I'm in this really deep, dark place coming off this wonderful gift that I've been granted, but all of a sudden now I'm struggling, right? I'm in the deepest part of my life. I can't figure out who I was because right after cancer, I still had my identity as an athlete.
Yeah.
I still was, my purpose was to be professional again, and I thought that was what it was. And all of a sudden, reality started to hit me. I'm like, I can't compete with Lionel Sanders if I can't even run a 16-minute 5K. I can't bike with Lionel Sanders if well, no one bikes with Lionel Sanders, but you
Yeah.
can't, you can't. Well, I tried at Indian Wells, but you can't do these things. So I'm just like, it's starting to get farther and farther away from me. So all of a sudden now I had a really hard time, and I went into a depression the first time in my life. I'd never, fortunately, because I always had my identity, I always had an outlet, or I had something. This time I didn't have an outlet.
Mm.
I didn't know where to go, what to do, and basically I just started trying fishing. I tried to do my country things, and it was enjoyable, but again, what is associated with country?
Yeah.
Beer.
Yeah.
So you start to get into this really bad circle, right? And so all of a sudden I'm just like, what am I gonna do here? So that summer sucked. That was really hard. I mean, luckily Dre was there for me and was helping me, but it was the first time I experienced depression, and man, that was ugly. I would never wish that on my worst enemies. That was, not that I have enemies, but if I
Yeah.
did, like, I wouldn't wish it on them. That it sucked.
Yeah. It's, I'm glad that you brought it up. Because I think it's important for people to hear.
For sure.
And you know, that's a part of the story that's probably not the easiest to talk about.
Not at all. No. Especially too, because if you go way back in my family, like alcoholism is a huge thing. Like it's very prominent. Like and so that's why for me, like I felt like, hey, if I just cut it at 4, like I'm still in control, right?
Right.
And after a while, I started realizing that like it was no longer the reward. It was no longer like the celebration of a day. All of a sudden, the habit now, I still had it under control, but it still was. I mean, that's a lot.
Yeah.
I mean, that's not good.
No.
And so all of a sudden I had this habit. And so all of a sudden now, like, I couldn't blame the weight on not training, not this, because I hadn't knocked out the one thing that I didn't want to give up. So now all of a sudden, now I'm in this paradox of I want to be this athlete that can do it, but I can't because I have this habit that I can't kick. And then all of a sudden now, also on top of it, you have chemo, right? So I'm doing no justice for myself because I'm in this huge depression or this huge rut that I've never experienced before. And all it was because I had lost my identity. I had no idea who I was. And the sad part is I forgot the promise that I made to myself.
Do you have a specific moment that you can track back to where you were like, I got to get my head out of my ass? Like that kind of moment. Like, do you have an experience, or like, do you remember?
Yeah.
Do you remember
Luckily,
that?
it was a person, right? So Dash Hydrate, where I work now,
Okay.
or where I'm trying to get this hydration company off the vine. So Dakota is the owner of it, and so helping him coach. He wants to try to do Ironman Texas. So I'm going to do it with him. Basically, he just looked at me, and I was doing the whole like, I'm all right, like I'm hiding it, I'm doing well. I don't think people can see me. Like I I still wake up early. Like I drink 4, still wake up, still hammer my workout, right? Like again, that's how I thought I was still okay, right?
Right.
And so the hard part is that like all of a sudden he just looked at me, he's just like, "You're not okay," and I'm like, "What do you mean?" He's just like, "Are you drinking?" And I'm like, all of a sudden I just sat there. I'm just like, do I tell him the truth or do I lie? Like, what do I do here? So I go, you know what? Screw it. I'm going to tell him. Yeah, I am. Yeah, I am. I have basically 4 a night. And all of a sudden he's just like, okay, we're going to fix this. Like, we're going to stop this. And he goes, all right, so your wedding is 21 days away. You're not going to drink until your wedding. And I'm just like, okay. He's like, can you do that? And I go, absolutely. I know I can. Like, I'll do it. I have a business trip coming up for a whole week. And you know what you do on business trips? Usually you drink. And I go, I'm going to do this. I'm going to commit to this. I'm going to commit to him, and I'm going to do this. So basically I started it, and all of a sudden, like 7 days turned into 10 days, 10 days turned into 14. And all of a sudden during that process, I realized I'm just like, if I had a beer right now, he wouldn't know. And then all of a sudden I go, well, wait a minute. It's not about him. Like, yeah, right now the catalyst was to stop because I made a promise to him and a promise to my wife to not drink till the wedding. And all of a sudden I just go, I can get this under control. This is my life. It's me and what I decide. And all of a sudden I started looking back at pictures, and all of a sudden I started looking at the chemo chair. All of a sudden I just go, holy shit. I totally forgot the promise that I was living. Oh my God. Like, what the hell am I doing here? Like, and all of a sudden the moment, and I just needed that catalyst to stop me from kicking that habit, to all of a sudden I'm just like, okay, now I can climb myself out of this. I can see the path. I can see this. And so then what I also started doing at that time too is I started to realize I'm having an identity crisis is what's happening. And so I go, I need to come up with a healthy way of sport. Because right now, for me, it's professional or nothing. I got to find a healthy boundary or a healthy line of sport, because I don't know if I'll ever get back to where I was, but also people have more support for me accomplishing a 700-mile bike week than when I did the 2019. I go, so maybe it's in my head right now about getting back to being a professional. Maybe it's more about the story of coming back from something so fucking horrible that you can still come back from that. I'm like, that's what it is. So I go, okay, I am no longer the 407-minute miler. I'm no longer the 814 guy. I am the 1607 5Ker, and that's my personal best. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep trying to cross off these things, and I'm going to try to keep getting better because that's where I'm at. So that's where I started deciding too. I go, I also want to do things that I've never done before. So that's where I'm just like, what if I do, so I have my eye on Race Across America. I don't know if I can do it this year, but next year for sure. Also, I started looking at endurance events. So all of a sudden, what Dakota did for me too is he just goes, I will pay for Ironman Texas if you commit 100% to it. And I go, deal. Like, we'll do it. So all of a sudden now I'm committed to that. And I'm like, we're going to do this. I'm 100% in and I'm going to do this. Like, I'm all in. So all of a sudden I started getting the ball rolling, and all of a sudden I started to let go of the professional of who I was. And all of a sudden I felt this huge weight come off my shoulder where there was no longer this pressure that honestly was in my head. Like, no one cared. Like, I could have quit and no one cared, right? But at the end of the day, that doesn't honor the promise that I gave myself. So I decided, I'm like, I got to turn this around and I got to reframe how I think. And so now my identity is more like I'm a cancer survivor who is trying to do incredible things, trying to, get this hydration company rocking, which I know we'll do, while helping people, while coaching, while, showing people that you can come out of this incredibly horrible place and still have a meaningful life. Like, is it what you were before? No. And maybe I do get back. I don't know. But at the end of the day, I want to do incredible things. I want to run that 100K. I want to run a 100-mile run race. And all of a sudden, I guess, got this bug. And honestly, that was the life-saving moment, was when Dakota, called me on my shit. And then all of a sudden now I was able to reframe myself to pull myself out. So now I have a very healthy relationship, I'd say, with drinking to where it should be. And I've been able to get it back under control, and then, still now compete and do things specifically. So
yeah, it sounds like to me, he basically brake checked you.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
He's like, oh, this guy's moving a little fast.
Yep.
And it's amazing. Some people just have that ability.
Yep.
To see it.
For sure.
And what a gift, right? At the end of the day, that he, one, saw it, but two, cared enough about you to be like, let's not do this.
Yeah, exactly.
You know what I mean? That's a solid person.
Yep.
Because a lot of people won't say shit.
Yeah. And that's
speaking from experience, and they don't owe it to you.
No.
They don't owe it to you. But a lot of people won't pull you aside and say, basically, you're fucking up.
Yeah.
Right. But we all need those people.
For sure.
Even after we do great things.
Yep.
Because we get off track.
For sure.
We get off track, and we need someone to help realign us at times. And I think that's what community's for. I think that's what sharing these types of stories are for, because it's a reminder of, God, in the way that I see it, and everybody has different views on this, but for me, God didn't save my life for me to do nothing with it.
Exactly.
Just because it's not what I wanted to do with it doesn't mean I shouldn't do anything.
Exactly.
Right. And I've found more purpose in that alone. And like, hey, that's where Ain't Dead Yet came from. It's like, okay, for whatever reason, God decided he wanted me to stick around. How ridiculous would it be for me to waste that?
Oh, for sure. It's a waste of a gift.
It's a slap in the face to the people that that did make it.
Yeah, that's a better way of saying it.
Right. And it's like their lives weren't valuable. Like, that's how you're going to do it. You're going to spit in their face. Like, so that's, sometimes I have to get personal with myself like that to like really relight the fire. I have to remember, like, you're doing it for those who can't, or those who didn't make it. Right. Or it's the purpose when you face that, the reaper, as you spoke, like God brought you out of that. And it's like, what am I going to do with it? And so it's crazy, though, to see how you've pivoted and transitioned through all these different points in your journey. Because, and I said it earlier, there's been so many opportunities where you could have just said, no, I'm good. Because you could. Like, the reality of it is you could, if you wanted to, you could stop training. You could start drinking every day. And you could go get a 9-to-5.
Yep.
And you could, I don't know how your marriage would go or any of those things, but like, you could do that.
Yeah.
But choosing friction, choosing the hard path, because you understand that like your purpose is to show other people it can be done. That's where the sauce is at, man.
Oh yeah.
That's where the sauce is at. And so I don't know, man. It's been so inspiring and amazing to watch you from afar, and then to get to know you more now personally, especially, you know, since you guys are really getting going on Dash. And I swore I would never shout anybody out for brands as far as the podcast goes, but like you guys looked out for me too.
Yep.
Right. Based on a story.
Yep.
Right. Based on a story and based on an interaction that you and I had 3 years ago.
Exactly.
And it's like, that's what I want to share with the listener and the viewer. Like every conversation you have matters.
For sure.
And the way you make people feel matters. And I think that's what's going to be really cool about Dash, because everyone that I see that's involved with that's how they view life. They want to help people.
Yep.
Right. They don't want to sit around and kind of like dwell on how bad their life has been or the things that they've been through. Like they want to take that and help people with that. And I think that, you know, that message alone and that culture alone will take any company far, hydration product or not. You can sell shoes.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Good culture is good culture, just like in sport.
Yep.
You know, you look at teams of great success over the years. They might not have had the most talent. They had good culture.
Absolutely.
So to see you doing that, and honestly, like to see you on social media, check in and see like what you got going on and doing stuff with Dakota and doing stuff with your wife. Like, dude, it looks like you're having fun.
Yeah. I would say this is the happiest I've ever been in my life.
That's amazing.
Mm-hmm.
But to get there, got dark.
Yeah.
You know,
Did it ever.
and that's what we have to share with people. Like,
And that's the thing too. Like, you know, at that moment too, like you got to be willing to say it too, you know, cause like Dakota pulled me aside. If I don't say anything,
you're not here.
You know, because you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink, right?
Yeah.
Like you got to be willing to. So I think that's the hard part too. Is like, I think as men, we hold things back, and I'm sure women do too. But like for me right now, I can only speak on behalf of a man because that's what I am. But like we hold it back, right? And so at that moment, I also chose, I'm gonna tell him, right? Because like the other thing too is like my dad and I are close. I could tell him. I didn't because I was embarrassed, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, but I chose to tell Dakota, and he gave me the power that I needed to do it, right? And that's what I think is so beautiful about this podcast too, is we're trying to open, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you're trying to open that door for somebody to say something. So hopefully we can be the catalyst to help you do something, right? Because it's just like sport. My story might not be as dark as someone else. It might be darker than somebody else, but it's not a competition of who had the darkest path. It's, did we all get to the light?
Yep.
And so it's the same as endurance. I might be ripping around the track and you might not, but we're still experiencing the same damn thing.
Yep.
So if we all kind of face death, or even if you didn't face death and you're going through a hard time, you know, reach out, say something, because we want people living an incredible, meaningful life, and you can do it, but you gotta say something first.
Yeah, you have to, and I think that's the message is getting to a place as a society, especially within men. And this isn't saying women don't have challenges. I'm certainly not going there. Like that's not.
Yep.
I promise, I'm not saying that. But for men specifically, we don't talk about our shit. You know, we just don't.
No.
And even people that we're close with, we don't open up to about what we're dealing with all the way, right? We're like, I'm good, figuring it out. Yeah, life sucks, whatever, you know. But we're not like peeling back the onion.
Yep.
And unfortunately, all that happens, especially within men that I see, is it just festers. It just gets worse and worse and worse and worse and worse, and eventually something happens you can't come back from.
Yeah.
And so we're trying to get to a point where it's like, who cares if you were addicted to drugs? Who cares if you were an alcoholic? Who cares if you were obese? Who cares if anything?
Yeah.
Right? It's what did you do with that?
Yep.
Right? That's the message, and that's what we're trying to do. But the only way to get more people doing those types of things is for people to, like you're doing today, sit here and talk about the darkness, because that's what people relate to.
For sure.
I don't relate to you being a state champion,
No.
like a sprinter, runner.
Yeah.
I don't relate to you being a D1 runner. I don't have any relation there.
Yep.
I relate to depression
Hmm.
as I don't know what percentage of men listening to this probably do too.
Oh, for sure.
Right. And so we're not all track stars. We're not all endurance athletes. We're not all business owners, but there are things that we all go through. And I think that that's, we have more in common than we do different. So I think focusing on that and helping people through those times in life that's the sauce. That's where we got to live.
Absolutely.
So, man, I appreciate you coming on. This has been awesome.
Thank you.
I couldn't have ever imagined a better first guest for this. It's kind of a full circle moment for me, especially given, the position I was in when we first met.
Yep.
And where we're both at now, and how much has actually happened in that amount of time. It's incredible.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for having me on. It's an incredible thing that you're trying to do, and I'm happy to share my story. Like I said, I think I haven't had an outlet to even say it. I don't think I've ever actually gone through my full story. So thank you for giving me that opportunity, and I hope it gives somebody, if it helps just one person, like, it was more than worth it. So
Absolutely.
Thank you for giving me the medium or the outlet to be able to do this. So thank you.
100%, man. And it's going to help people. There's no doubt. So appreciate you, bro.
Thank you.